You're watching a BBC News election special with me, Joanna Gosling, as we bring you the results of local elections which have been taking place in England and Northern Ireland. It's bad news for both the Conservatives and Labour as voters turn away from the two main parties.
Sadly, the big parties are being punished for what's happening over Brexit, and they're forgetting the local issues.
Members of Parliament saying that we need to be having a people's vote on a second referendum. People in Sunderland have said we're just not accepting that from the Labour Party, and I have lost 10 councillors tonight because of that Brexit situation.
It's been a good night for independent candidates and the Greens, as well as the Liberal Democrats, who have made significant gains in the results announced so far.
It's a fantastic morning. Liberal Democrats are back in business.
I'm Annita McVeigh, live at Westminster. They may have been local elections, but national politics seems to have been a deciding factor for voters, with both Conservatives and Labour hit by an apparent Brexit backlash. There are calls for Theresa May to go after the difficult night for her party, which many are putting down to her handling of Brexit.
I think we need change. I mean, I just don't think we can continue like this. I've been very clear, quite frankly. Many of my constituents have said this to me, we need change. We need a change of leadership. Perhaps the time has now come for that.
We will bring you all the overnight results, including full analysis of why the Tories and Labour suffered those losses and what's behind the gains for the Lib Dems as the daytime counts begin. Good morning. Welcome to the BBC News election special. Voters have punished the Conservatives and Labour in early results from the local elections in England in what appears to be a protest against the deadlock over Brexit at Westminster. As counting got underway last night, it quickly became clear that the smaller parties, such as the Liberal Democrats and Greens and independent candidates, were winning seats around the country. Nearly 100 of the 248 councils up for election have declared their results. Counting in the remaining authorities, as well as in Northern Ireland, takes place later. Well, let's take a look at the results so far. And these are the results on the councillor figures. 8,400 council seats in all up for grabs. So let's just take a look at what's been happening with the councillors. The number of councillors for the Conservatives has dropped by 442. Big losses there for Conservatives. Labour also suffering losses, down 79. But as you can see from these figures, the real winners of the night, the Lib Dems, the Greens and the Independents. The Liberal Democrats up 304 councillors, and Ed Davey said that the Lib Dems are back in business. And the Independents is really interesting. John Curtis, the election analyst, has said that actually in the 69 councils where Independents were standing, they won on average around 25% of the vote. They are amongst the biggest winners, and their UKIP also suffering, down 54. Let's take a look at what's happened with the councils. 248 councils in England are there for the taking, so we'll take a look at how the numbers are stacking up at this stage. Don't forget, there are still 140 councils yet to declare, and we'll bring you those results through the day. So the councils, as they stand at the moment, again, Labour and the Conservatives both suffering losses, and again, it's the same story with the Liberal Democrats, the Greens, the Independents, all up, and the number of hung councils also up by 8. Well, with more on the story of the night so far, here's Jessica Parker.
To serve as member for...
Results coming in, some smiles and cheers. A hold in the battleground of Swindon for the Tories, and again in north-east Lincolnshire. But elsewhere, less favourable results. The Conservatives losing control in areas such as St Albans, Southend, Broxtowe and Peterborough. Theresa May, polling card in hand. But what does the picture so far mean for her?
I think she needs to take a look at how many councillors we've lost overnight, wake up in the morning and think about how she thinks the Conservative Party needs to put its best foot forward.
These ballot boxes brought good news for Labour, where they took control of Trafford. But the party lost control of councils in Hartlepool and Bolsover. A sense in some areas but it wasn't quite the night they'd hoped for.
It's not looking good. This is going to be a very difficult night for Labour. We've been out and about across the borough, and the message we're getting loud and clear is all about Brexit, and the residents are telling us they're going to make sure there's some change because of their dissatisfaction over Brexit.
So signs that it could be some of the smaller parties, like the Liberal Democrats and Greens, as well as local independents, that are on the advance. The Lib Dems gaining areas like North Norfolk, Winchester and Cotswold District Council.
Actually feeling pretty buoyant. We're seeing a lot of our vote coming out, and the national picture, of course, is really tough for the Tories.
However, there's a way to go yet. This is a big set of local elections, and the parties are watching closely, peering into what it might mean for their wider fortunes. Here, in the wee hours, though, is this some cross-party collaboration, or perhaps commiseration? So on it goes, verdicts being delivered, one ballot box after another. They were certainly eager to get going here. It's democracy in energetic action. And energy may well be needed. The results for plenty of other races are yet to come. Jessica Parker, BBC News.
Yes, a lot more results still to come in 140 English councils and all of the councils in Northern Ireland. Well, as we've been hearing, the poor performance of both Labour and the Conservatives in the local elections in England is being blamed on a Brexit backlash. Let's go to Annita McVeigh, who's in Westminster with reaction from there. Over to you, Annita. Morning.
Morning, Joanna. Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. Yes, potentially are these the least local elections we've seen for a very long time indeed, with Brexit being such a dominant feature of national life. Well, let's get the thoughts straight away of our assistant political editor, Norman Smith, who's with me here. Norman, let's talk about the big themes, the big stories emerging so far.
Well, the biggest is the Brexit backlash, which both the main parties have been hit by, no getting away from it. It's been a disastrous night for both of them, and I think we can put that squarely down to the fact to sort out Brexit. And you just sense voters out in the country have just gone, you guys have failed big time, and have looked for anyone but the above to vote for. So we've actually seen a huge increase in the number of votes going to independents, for example. I think they've got more than 200 new successful candidates as voters just cast around looking for anyone but the usual people they vote for to cast their support for. On the Labour side, it has meant a real hemorrhage of support in their traditional Leave supporting heartland. So they've lost seats in areas like Sunderland, Hartlepool, Barnsley, Bolsover, the home of the beast, Dennis Skinner. They've lost control of the council there. And
really symbolic.
Hugely symbolic. And it's not just me saying that, it is the council leaders in those Labour areas. The leader of Barnsley Council, the leader of Newcastle Council, Nick Forbes, saying it's all down to the Brexit fudge. On the Tory side, very similar tale. I mean, they lost Cotswolds Council. Cotswolds Council is the home of David Cameron, Shepherd's Huts, Greenwellers, you name it. It is true blue Tory country. They lost that. North East Somerset, the home of Jacob Rees-Mogg. And it is blindingly clear that many Tories are fed up to the back teeth of what they regard as the Brexit impasse, and already we're beginning to see the Brexiteers saying, and also Mrs May. So we are seeing figures like Bernard Jenkins, Priti Patel saying it's not just Brexit, it is Theresa May as well. Have a listen to Priti Patel.
Do you think Theresa May needs to go?
Well, I think that is absolutely now the ultimate question, and I will reflect and play back many of the comments that I've had on the doorstep over certainly the last 3 weeks while I've been knocking on doors. People have very categorically said that, she is part of the problem. So I think, where we've got to now look at these results, look at our direction of travel going forward as a party. I think obviously our party leadership and our party nationally needs to look at the situation and make some very, very serious decisions now in terms of where we go.
Where would you like to see it go?
Well, I think we need change. I mean, I just don't think we can continue like this. I've been very clear, quite frankly. Many of my constituents have said this to me, we need change. We need a change of leadership. Perhaps the time has now come for that.
So, Norman, it's clear that point that I was making, the least local elections, arguably, that we've ever had because of this absolutely dominant issue of Brexit.
One of the key winners from all that, though, it seems, is the Liberal Democrats, who were flat on their back, frankly, going into these elections. The last time these were fought, I think they had their worst result ever. So given that, and given Labour and the Tories are having a horror show, you would expect them to do well. But they have done pretty well. I mean, one of the most striking results was, as I say, in North East Somerset, where they got shot of 23 Tory councillors to seize control. I suppose one of the question marks I'm wondering is whether Vince Cable will use this as his swan song to say, look, I've taken the party back, we're on the road again, and will actually leave quite soon now as a sort of to go out on a high. More broadly, they claim these are the best results they've had in a generation. Here's Ed Davey.
It's a fantastic morning. Liberal Democrats are back in business. To put it in context, I think this is a sea change. I think voters have been desperate for a strong alternative to the Conservatives and Labour, who've made such a mess of everything the last few years. And now voters have it. They've chosen the Liberal Democrats, not just to protest, but to put their faith in us around the country, in the north against Labour, in the south against the Conservatives. This was our best night for a generation.
Came from quite a low starting point, though, didn't you?
No, well, if you look at it in context, back when Labour was taking Britain into an illegal war in Iraq and Liberal Democrats were opposing it, we got great results that year. These are better than that. When John Major's Conservative government was in meltdown, we got good results. These results look, they may be as good as then. So these are historic in terms of Liberal Democrat success and victories. So, you know, on the back of this, we think it's a real clear signal to the British people that if you want to stop Brexit, you vote Liberal Democrat.
It was your worst ever results in 2015, though, wasn't it? Let's put this into fair context.
And these are our best ever results. I mean, sorry, you're not going to depress me on this night. We've been taking seats in councils and places that we never expected. You know, we're winning places that weren't even on our best hopeful list.
Ed Davey there, Norman. Well, let's just take a look at something the Shadow Chancellor, John McDonnell, has been tweeting in the last hour. He'll say we'll see what final results of local elections look like by the end of the day, as they are pretty mixed geographically up to now. But so far, message from local elections, Brexit sorted, message received. Which brings me on to another question, Norman. I mean, exactly what message can the parties extrapolate from the results so far?
Well, I think it's interesting, that John McDonnell tweet about sorting Brexit, because there will now be huge pressure on Jeremy Corbyn to do the deal with Theresa May, because it's quite clear it's hurting Labour. Brexit is hurting Labour, and his hopes of getting beyond that to get out his message on austerity is just being drowned out by the noise over Brexit. So I think there will be renewed pressure on him to buckle over that, even with all the risks that come with that. The other thing which I think both the main parties have to brace themselves for is, last night was bad, but boy, oh boy, it could get a lot worse in a fortnight's time when Nigel Farage's Brexit party enter the fray and Change UK enter the fray, and voters will have clear choices. If you don't like Brexit, go with Change UK. If you do like Brexit, go with Nigel Farage. So the squeeze and pressure on the two main parties in a fortnight's time is going to make last night look like a picnic.
OK, Norman, thank you very much. Yes, plenty of opportunity coming up in those European elections for voters to send a message to the two main parties, absolutely. Well, one of the reasons why this particular set of results in these local elections is so interesting and such a useful comparison to what's gone before is that most of the seats contested yesterday were contested at the last general election, which of course benefited the Conservative Party at that time as well. It was thought there would be a natural correction for the Conservative Party from that point, although of course that means we do have to consider additional losses for the Conservatives. Just let me also tell you that, as well as opinion and analysis here at Westminster, we will be taking you all over England and indeed Northern Ireland to get reaction from lots of different locations to what's been happening in your areas. But right now, here at Westminster, I'm joined by the Conservative Party Deputy Chair, Helen Whately. Helen, thank you very much for coming along. You will know some of those figures that Norman was quoting just a moment ago. For example, the Lib Dems taking North East Somerset, ousting 23 Conservative councillors in that vote overnight, and Priti Patel and others saying that the reason for this is Theresa May and her handling of Brexit. Do you agree that it's a time for a change of leadership?
I don't agree with that. I agree that a factor in these elections is clearly Brexit. I mean, we always knew this was going to be a tough election for us, that these are the seats that were last elected in 2015 when we were on a high point. A general election helped with turnout as well. And so this was going to be difficult, and we had forecasts of around 1,000, even more than 1,000 seats could be lost by the Conservatives. I think one thing that is very interesting is I had thought that Labour would be making much stronger gains, and they don't appear to have been doing so. There are also some places where we have held on, and we haven't done as... I thought, for instance, that Swindon would go, for instance, to having different control. It's remained overall control, and we've won in North East Lincolnshire. So we have got some positive... overall, yes, it's a different picture. I think but
Brexit clearly is the dominant factor. You say it's a factor, but it clearly is a dominant factor. We've heard from local government leaders saying exactly that, blaming the loss of councillors, colleagues that they have worked with for some years on Brexit.
So I feel, and I really feel for councillors, council candidates, that I've been campaigning with my local council candidates, and I know how hard they've worked, and that there is a factor clearly in these elections of the national situation and Brexit, and that's really tough.
So what do you do with that message?
So to me, the strongest message there is for MPs and for Parliament that we've got to get on and do Brexit. That many people voted to leave, 17.5 million people voted to leave, and they're frustrated that we haven't left. But of course, that we know that also the country is divided on this, so we have to do a moderate Brexit that works for everybody. That's a really strong message to Labour MPs as well as Conservative MPs to move on and support us leaving the European Union, but working for having a good future relationship with them. That's what it's telling me.
Are you clear on that? Are you clear that it's voters saying we've gone to these other parties because we want Brexit to go ahead? Because, for example, I'll go back to North East Somerset. There are other examples of this. People have moved to the Lib Dems who want the UK to remain in the EU. So how can you be sure that that is the message that is being delivered?
I won't deny there are clearly some people who may have voted Remain, and therefore it's another message that they can send. But also what I've seen overall is people just being very frustrated with the national picture and looking for an alternative, and looking at particularly who just seems to be local and apart from that. So I don't think that's particularly, I draw the same conclusions you just drew from that. And what I've heard...
I'm not drawing conclusions such as much as suggesting that that may be a possible interpretation of it.
No, I mean, I think if we do end up having the European elections, that will be another chance where people will restate their view on Brexit as well. But I do feel overall this huge desire for us to move on as a country.
You deftly sidestep the question of whether Theresa May is ultimately the person responsible for all of this in terms of her handling of Brexit. But obviously there are still results to come, but if this continues to be, a disappointing night and a disappointing day for the Conservatives, and the European elections, if they go ahead, are also disappointing for the Conservatives, is that really the point at which Theresa May needs to go, in your opinion?
I don't think so at all. And on the doorstep, when I heard people who were frustrated with us and that we haven't delivered Brexit, it wasn't actually particularly frustration at the Prime Minister. It was overall a frustration at Parliament for not seeing through the referendum result. And the challenge for the Prime Minister is overall the divisions in Parliament and the numbers and the maths. And that's what we need to get through and have a Brexit deal that a majority of MPs will support, so we can move on.
OK, Helen Wakely, Deputy Chair of the Conservative Party, thank you very much for your time. And we can get some thoughts from Labour now, the Labour Party's Chair, Ian Lavery, who joins us from Newcastle. Good morning to you, Mr Lavery. Clearly, it's a disappointing night. There have been some significant and symbolic gains for Labour in some places, but a disappointing night in terms of losses of councillors. Like the Conservatives, we've seen local government leaders blaming the party's handling of Brexit. So what message do you take from the results so far?
Well, what we have seen is that the message of austerity has angered people on the doorstep. The fact that there's been lack of investment in the NHS, lack of investment in education, reduction in living standards, but that's been trumped mainly in the areas who feel by and large disenfranchised from the political process, has been trumped by the message of Brexit. And I think we've gotten a clear message from a lot of these communities, a lot of these constituencies, that the two parties need to get on and get Brexit sorted. And that's the message we've gotten by and large from the East Midlands to the West Midlands and north of that as well.
So you're saying that Labour has failed not only to hammer home its message, its policies on Brexit, but also in what might be seen as a more traditionally strong area for you, its handling of austerity. Is that what you're saying?
No, what I'm saying quite clearly is that the areas which I've already mentioned have got great concerns. There's been huge anger about Tory austerity, but there's more anger with regards to the fact that this government haven't been able to deliver a Brexit as the promise in the first place. And that's trumped the huge problems being faced by many people in these areas. And that's why people have getting out there. They voted with their feet. They voted for change. They voted for the smaller parties. And a lot of it is protest vote. And listen, I share their frustrations. The Labour Party, the Tory Party, all agreed that we would be leaving. We would have a Brexit in line with the 17.4 million people who voted for Brexit. And that hasn't happened. They're frustrated, they're angry, and we'll take that on board.
But your party colleague Barry Gardiner has been echoing that this morning and saying, you know, a party that has been speaking with two voices on a subject as huge as this can't expect to do well at the polls. But there's absolutely no sign, is there, that Labour is somehow going to make those two voices harmonise anytime soon and speak with a united voice on the subject of Brexit?
Well, listen, the reality about Brexit has been extremely divisive, and the Labour Party are the only party who are trying to bring both sides of that divide together. It's essential that regardless of what happens here, we bring this country together. We've seen what's happened on the streets of this country in the past year to 18 months. Very divisive, and we've got a duty as a political party to try and bring all sides of this together. And that's the huge challenge which we have got. And I'm sure that the Labour Party are best placed in order to do that. We haven't went one way, we haven't went the other. And the real reason is because the communities are split, the country's split, the constituencies are split. And yes, sadly, many of the parties are split as well. We've got a challenge, and I think we're up to that challenge.
Are you up to that challenge, though? Because at this point in the election cycle, with the Conservative Party absolutely torn apart over Brexit, with the Prime Minister losing 3 votes on her withdrawal agreement on Brexit, Labour should be absolutely trouncing the Conservatives, but it isn't, is it?
Well, as I say, what's happened on the doorsteps right across the country where we've had elections, people are very, very angry at austerity. People are frustrated at austerity. But what has trumped the austerity message is the Brexit issue. This is a Brexit election, and that's what we've had to deal with. But I mean, it's not normal under these circumstances. These are tumultuous times in the political history, for the want of a better term. These are times where anything could really have happened, but the people are frustrated, and we understand why they've went, and a lot of them have voted the way they have, and not traditional ways. However, again, I must say, by the way, that that the press are suggesting it's a disaster for Labour, it's a disaster for the Tory Party, that the Conservatives, on the basis of the figures we have at this moment in time, could lose more than 1,000 seats. The day isn't concluded yet. I think, and I'll predict, that the Labour Party the results will get better throughout the day. But we are disappointed in the situation to date.
Let's see what the rest of the day brings, Mr. Lavery. But just one final question to you, if I may. When you talk about trying to bring people together, bring the party together. Does that include a referendum, a confirmatory referendum, and a guarantee of that? Or does it mean that you think Jeremy Corbyn is now under more pressure to come to some sort of agreement with Theresa May over Brexit?
Well, what I have said is that the big challenge is to bring both sides of the divide together. What we've seen in the north, and the leader of Graham Miller, the leader of Sunderland City Council last night, said that the reason why there had been losses in Sunderland was purely because of the stance on a potential for a people's vote. People want to see Brexit over and done with. I'm hoping that Jeremy Corbyn
deal with Theresa May. Is that what you think?
Can't do this. I'm hoping Jeremy Corbyn and the team can get together, come up with a deal, a Brexit deal, in the best interest of the country, the best interest of the economy, jobs, and communities, security and the environment, with consumer protections and workers' rights, and we can get a deal and we can exit the EU as promised in the manifesto and as promised by this government.
OK, Ian Lavery, Chair of the Labour Party, thank you very much for your time this morning. Much more coming up from here, but right now let's go back to Joanna in the newsroom.
Thank you very much, Anita. There are the headline figures for you. The change in councillors shows losses, as we've been hearing, for heavy losses for the Conservatives, losses for Labour as well, and the real winners of the night, the Liberal Democrats, plus other independent and smaller parties. Well, let's take a closer look at some of the individual councils. The Conservatives have gained control of North East Lincolnshire Council for the first time since the authority was formed. Labour had previously run the council with Liberal Democrat support, as no party had a majority. Elsewhere, the Conservatives have retained control of East Riding in Yorkshire, taking 49 of the 67 seats. Labour lost all 6 of the seats it was defending. BBC Look North's Philip Norton has more.
Well, here in Beverley, all 67 seats on East Riding of Yorkshire Council are being contested, and already here the word is that turnout has been very low. The first confirmed ward turnouts were Bridlington Central and Old Town at 25.5%, Driffield and Rural at 28.1%. Now, of course, here the Conservatives have held the council since 2007. They currently hold 47 seats. One of the main changes, of course, that we'll see here is the leader of the council. Yorkshire's longest-serving council leader, Stephen Parnaby, announcing that he wasn't standing after 23 years as leader. Also standing here is Matthew Grove, of course, once a Conservative councillor and Humberside Police's first Police and Crime Commissioner. Now, he's standing here as an independent candidate for the Holderness ward. Now, Graham Stewart, the local MP, is here. He's watching proceedings, and he's told me it could be a very difficult night for the Conservatives.
The Liberal Democrats made sweeping gains across Devon, gaining 5 seats in Torbay and 10 in North Devon. The party missed out of taking control of North Devon by a single seat. Labour held every one of their seats in Plymouth and gained another, with Luke Pollard, the MP, saying his local party members were bucking the national trend and showing what Labour can achieve. On a difficult night for the Conservatives, they dropped behind UKIP in several Plymouth wards, including Ham, Devonport and Honeyknoll. Martin Oates, BBC South West's political editor, has more.
There are some remarkable similarities between the results here tonight and the results here in this hall almost exactly a year ago. Then the Conservative government was not being particularly helpful in terms of its national policies for the Conservative councillors on the ground here. On that occasion, Labour took the council from the Conservatives, bucking the national trend. It was the only target council that Labour took that night. Jeremy Corbyn turned up the next morning to celebrate. Tonight, Labour may have been damaged elsewhere. Here again, though, they've done well. They've held on to the council with the addition of 1 seat to their majority. Labour's also held Exeter City Council. It would have taken an absolute meltdown in their vote for them to lose it. However, they did lose 1 seat to the Green Party, and the city's Labour MP, a prominent Remainer and a prominent critic of the Labour leader Jeremy Corbyn, was quick to attribute this to the party not having a firm enough policy on a second referendum on our EU membership. I think the interesting thing to look ahead to now is tomorrow. We've seen the Tory-Labour fight in the region's two big cities tonight. Elsewhere across the region, the rural southwest, the fight is very much between the Tories and the Lib Dems. We'll have to wait until tomorrow to see whether the Lib Dems enjoy a resurgence against the Tories.
Well, there are still 137 councils to declare. And let me just tell you that we are expecting shortly to see Jeremy Corbyn. He is going to be out and about in Sale, in Trafford, in Greater Manchester. The Labour winning control of Trafford Council for the first time in more than 10 years. It's the one council that Labour has won so far. They're not all in, so that we haven't got the full picture, but that is the one council they've won so far. And we're expecting to see Jeremy Corbyn shortly. So we'll go straight to that when it happens. But let's, in the meantime, speak to the polling analyst, Professor John Curtis. Welcome.
Good morning.
So the voters have spoken, some of them. We have to read between the lines. What do you think they're saying?
Well, I think the fact that both the Conservative Party and the Labour Party have seen their vote fall, and frankly, as compared with the local elections 12 months ago, fall by roughly similar amounts, does, I think, bring home the message. We knew already that the Conservatives were in deep trouble as a result of their failure to deliver Brexit, but it also looks as though the Labour Party is also being punished because of dissatisfaction with the way in which it's been reacting to the Brexit impasse as well. And I think, more broadly, one can see how the parties in particular were being punished where they might be regarded as part of the establishment. So the Labour Party loses ground, Trafford accepted, more in the north of England than they do in the south. The opposite is true for the Conservatives. The Labour's vote tends to go down more in Labour-held wards. The Conservative vote goes down more in Conservative-held wards. And then if you add to that picture this remarkable success of independent candidates, tripling the number of independent councillors in the councils have been declared so far, again, maybe perhaps an indication of, well, look, if there's somebody around who isn't standing on a party ticket, I can really tell the party system what I think about it. Put all that together, and I think, there is a sense whereby basically both parties are being told that so far at least you've not been up to scratch, you've been found wanting as a result of Brexit, and that therefore to that extent it's a rather wider protest than, for example, simply Leave voters leaving the Conservative Party because they're unhappy about Brexit, or indeed, Leave voters leaving their party because they're unhappy about Brexit. It seems to be a rather wider protest than that.
And when you look at the success of the Liberal Democrats, which is a declared Remain party, it's tempting to think, is that the message that's coming through from voters?
It's tempting to think that, and I think the Liberal Democrats want you to think that. But the intriguing thing is that actually it's not obvious that the Liberal Democrat vote goes up particularly more in Remain areas than it does in Leave areas. It does go, what it does do, it tends to go up more in places where the Liberal Democrats already have a degree of strength locally. Lots of places where they started off second, lots of the places where they used to have an MP until 2015 and they lost it. So a lot of that local Liberal Democrat strength seems to have been restored. But remember, some of the remarkable successes of the Liberal Democrats have been in the southwest, not particularly a Remaining area. So I think this is probably much more about how the Democrats are to some degree, A, rediscovering some of their local roots, and B, beginning to act once again as the party of protest, which of course used to be their traditional role until they entered the coalition with the Conservatives in 2010.
And what about the Eurosceptic vote? Because the UKIP vote has gone down.
Well, the UKIP vote is down as compared with 2015, which is what we're mostly comparing it with. But remember that in 2015, UKIP got 13% of the vote in the general election that day and did similarly in the local elections. So it's a high baseline. It's actually down by about, on average, about 4 points or so as compared with then. But that, of course, does mean that as compared with last year's local elections, for example, when UKIP came close to disappearing, UKIP have recovered quite substantially. So, yes, we are not seeing here some of the dramatic increase in the Eurosceptic vote that we've seen in some of the polls, but then Nigel Farage's Brexit party wasn't standing. But we do have evidence that, particularly in Leave voting areas, the Eurosceptic vote is back up and is up at a level where, but for the UKIP performance in between 2013 and 2015, we would have historically found quite remarkable. So there's a warning sign here for the Conservatives. Yep, the Brexit, there is a Eurosceptic vote. It is back and running, and maybe when they're having to face Nigel Farage in 3 weeks' time, they will find it an even more considerable challenge.
It's not over, because there's going to be a lot of counting happening today. 137 councils still to be declared, so the vote just 44.8% complete at the moment,
Yes.
and none of the Northern Ireland councils declared at all. Could the picture change? What should we be looking out for?
I think the thing that the Conservatives have to worry about is that the councils that are being counted today are disproportionately more rural, Tory shire councils, where it is the Liberal Democrats who are often the bigger challengers rather than the Labour Party. And given the pattern we've seen so far of the Liberal Democrats doing better in Tory areas, increasingly about more in Tory areas, particularly when they're starting off second, I think they must have a concern that indeed the scale of Tory losses will indeed be quite substantially north of 500 if they don't necessarily reach the 1,000 point. And at the end, by this evening, the simple headline for the Conservatives at least, will not look that good, that they will be seen to have suffered losses not dissimilar to what was anticipated in advance, even though the Labour Party has actually also proven to be relatively weak.
Thank you very much, John. We're still waiting to hear from Jeremy Corbyn. He's, as I said, out in Sale in Trafford. That one council so far that Labour have taken control of. It's a significant win, though, for Labour, because it's the first time they've won that council in more than a decade. So we'll go straight to Sale as soon as we see Jeremy Corbyn and get his reaction to these results so far. But for now, let's just catch up with the weather with Simon.
Hi there, good morning. The bank holiday weekend is nearly upon us, and if you've got plans, take note, because it's going to turn much colder compared to recent days, certainly much colder than last year's early May bank holiday. We've got this cold front moving its way southward, introducing Arctic air right across the UK as we go into the weekend. Showery rain across central areas, drifting its way further south, but it'll stay quite cloudy for many of us. But you can see those temperatures across northern parts, 7 to 11 degrees Celsius. Further south, holding on to some milder conditions with a bit of sunshine in the far southwest. We'll continue with some showers through the night, but those mostly clear away. Further winter showers into northeast Scotland, northeast England. Look at the blues here, a frost across northern parts through tonight. There'll be some clear skies to take us into Saturday morning, a bright start to the day, but there'll be some showers in eastern areas. But look at those temperatures, 10 to 13 degrees. Bye-bye.
The United Kingdom is leaving the European Union.
More than ever united. But it's the opposite.
She has accepted the backstop 2 times, now she refused the backstop.
She got onto a plane without having cleared it with the DUP. Pathetic. Pathetic.
With unprecedented access to the EU side throughout the entire Brexit negotiation.
No deal is better than a bad deal. Who has said that?
Brexit Behind Closed Doors starts Wednesday at 9 on BBC 4.
Welcome back. Voters have punished the Conservatives and Labour in early results from the local elections in England in what appears to be a protest against the deadlock over Brexit at Westminster. As counting got underway last night, it quickly became clear that the smaller parties and independent candidates were winning seats around the country. Nearly 100 of the 248 councils up for election have declared their results. Counting in the remaining authorities, as well as in Northern Ireland, will take place later. Let's take a look at some of the key results in England. This is the overall picture on the total tally of councillors. You can see the Conservatives suffering heavy losses there, Labour also suffering losses, and the big winners of the night, the Liberal Democrats, up by 304 seats, the Greens and Independents as well up. And the interesting thing to note with Independents is in the 69 councils where they fielded candidates, they took 25% of the vote on average. Let's take a look at what has happened with councils, and there are some interesting stories to pick out from the overview. The overview there, as you can see, is that Conservatives have lost control of 16 councils and Labour have lost control of 2 councils. The Liberal Democrats up 8 and Independents up 2, and the number of hung councils has increased by 8. In terms of the specifics, Labour has won overall control of Trafford Council for the first time in 10 years, and that is where Jeremy Corbyn has chosen to be out and about this morning. And for the Liberal Democrats, they've won 8 councils. We were just hearing from Professor John Curtis that where they've seen real success is where they were just behind the Tories and have been building on previous support. They've won North East Somerset and Cotswold in particular. They're both notable because North East Somerset is Jacob Rees-Mogg territory, and the Cotswolds is, of course, David Cameron territory in terms of MPs, and these are the figures for reflecting what happened in North East Somerset. The Conservatives down quite dramatically there. So the question is, what does it indicate for Labour and the Tories as they digest what this says about Brexit? It is being described as a Brexit backlash, but the question for Labour in particular is going to be, what path does it take from here? Is it going to work harder to secure a deal on Brexit with the Tories? The next step in the elections is, of course, those European elections on the 23rd of May, and those will be potentially even more interesting than these results. So we have got more results to come out throughout the day. We will keep you across those results as they come in, and we'll bring you all of the reaction to the results as well as it happens. Right now, though, let's take a look at the rest of the day's news. More than 1 million people along India's northeast coast are sheltering in relief centres as the area is battered by the worst summer cyclone there for more than 40 years. Trees have been uprooted and electricity poles have been felled. Winds of up to 200 kilometres an hour have been forecast, as well as a possible storm surge. Ramzan Kamali has the latest.
Cyclone Fani hits land, battering India's east coast. This is the town of Puri, home of the Jagannath Temple. It's been standing here for over 850 years. Officials may have been braced as Fani headed up the Bay of Bengal, but with winds expected to reach speeds of 220 kilometres an hour and 100 million people in its path, precautions were taken. Many in the most exposed areas sought safety. Around 1 million have been evacuated from low-lying regions. Hundreds of emergency shelters have been set up and schools and universities closed.
Now we are first trying to evacuate the pregnant women and the lactating mothers, and particularly the old people and people in thatched houses, because they are more prone to danger. So we are just trying to lessen the human casualties.
Forecasters tracked Fani's progress as the eye of the cyclone approached Odisha state.
This storm system has a number of hazards attached to it. We've got torrential rain, 200 or 300 millimetres of rain on this, and ahead of the storm we'll get a storm surge working in across parts of Odisha, West Bengal and even into parts of Bangladesh, and that poses the threat of some significant flooding as well.
Officials have been using these forecasts to help them plan emergency operations. Thousands of relief workers have been deployed, and the government has set up a relief and rescue fund worth over $150 million in anticipation. But those officials are also warning that many homes and infrastructure caught in Cyclone Fani's path are likely to be completely destroyed. Ramzan Karmali, BBC News.
Our correspondent Rahul Tandon is in the capital of Odisha, which is right in the path of the storm. I'm afraid we can't actually hear from him at the moment, so we will bring you that a little bit later. New research has found people receiving effective treatment for HIV cannot pass on the virus to their sexual partners. A study published in the Lancet Medical Journal looked at nearly 1,000 gay male couples and discovered no cases of HIV transmission over 8 years. The researchers say it's a powerful message which everyone should be aware of. 1 and 2 pence coins are to remain in circulation after the Treasury confirmed it had gone back on plans to get rid of them. The Chancellor Philip Hammond said even though technology had transformed banking, it's important to give people a choice and help those who rely entirely on cash, particularly the elderly, vulnerable and those living in rural areas. In Thailand, preparations are underway for the coronation of King Maha Vajiralongkorn. It starts this weekend with a lavish 3-day ceremony. This morning in Bangkok, the day began with a procession which brought the king's name plaque, horoscope and royal emblem from the Temple of the Emerald Buddha to the Royal Palace. As the day continues, there'll be further elaborate ceremonies. The actor Peter Mayhew, who played Chewbacca in the Star Wars films, has died at the age of 74. The 7'2" actor played the Wookiee warrior in the original Star Wars trilogy in the late 1970s and early 80s, as well as some later films. Paying tribute, Harrison Ford, who played Chewbacca's companion Han Solo, described Peter as a kind and gentle man possessed of great dignity and noble character. Let's join Mike Bushell for a roundup of all the sport. Good morning, Mike.
Yes, good morning, Joanna. Thanks very much indeed. Well, hopes of an all-London Europa League final are still on after promising semi-final first-leg results from both Arsenal and Chelsea in the Europa League. So Arsenal are well in control of their semi-final despite going behind early on against Valencia. 2 goals from Alexandre Lacazette turned this first leg around, and then Pierre-Emerick Aubameyang gave them a much more comfortable 2-goal advantage ahead of next week's second leg in Spain. Well, Chelsea got a draw in Germany against Eintracht Frankfurt after going behind as well early on. Pedro nabbed a vital away goal ahead of next week's second leg at Stamford Bridge. Caster Semenya is set to run in the 800 metres in the Diamond League meeting in Doha later today, just 48 hours after the Court of Arbitration for Sport dismissed her challenge against the IAAF's new rules that restrict testosterone levels in female runners. There's speculation it could well be Semenya's last race as a professional after she posted on social media that knowing when to walk away is wisdom. The fast bowler Jofra Archer will make his England debut later when they play their opening ODI of the summer against Ireland. He's only just qualified to play international cricket for England after residency rules were changed, and he's trying to win a place in the World Cup squad. There's commentary on this one with the Test Match special team on Radio 5 Live Sports Extra from 10:30. The favourite Judd Trump is level with qualifier Gary Wilson in the semi-finals of the World Snooker Championships in Sheffield. It's 4 frames all after the first session. Wilson certainly showed his intent by knocking in a break of on 4-0 to go 2-1 up, but Trump, who reached the final in 2011, fought back to level it all up, and they resume at 2:30 this afternoon. David Gilbert is 5-3 up against John Higgins in the other semi-final. That's all the sport for now, Joanna, though lots more on these stories on the BBC Sport website. That's all for now, though. See you soon.
Thank you very much, Mike. See you soon. Now, as we've heard, the poor performance of both Labour and the Conservatives in the local elections in England is being blamed on a Brexit backlash. Let's go to Annita McVeigh, who's in Westminster with more reaction. Annita, back to you.
Joanna, thank you very much. Yes, a painful night for the Conservatives and to a lesser extent for Labour, although let's see what the day brings and how those figures shape up by the end of today. A lot of very strongly supporting Labour councils, those votes came in overnight, so could Labour's number of losses clock up through the day? Let's see. Well, Rita Chakrabarti has been taking a look at some of the key results so far.
One of the main themes of the night has been the loss of seats by the 2 main parties, the Conservatives and Labour, and the Liberal Democrats making gains largely at the expense of the Conservatives. So the screen here gives you a good impression of what has happened overnight. Councils like Bath and North East Somerset, Hinckley and Bosworth, the Liberal Democrats taking them from the Conservatives. Let me just show you what happened here in Bath and North East Somerset. This was a Labour gain with a majority of 15, and look at that, 37 Lib Dem gain, 37 Lib Dem councillors elected there with just 9 Conservatives. And I'll just show you the seat change there. There you go. 23 Liberal Democrat councillors gained and 24 lost by the Conservatives, so almost a straight swap. Let's go back to the main screen. Other stories emerging overnight are the Conservatives in certain places falling behind. They lost Folkestone and Hythe, for example. That is now in no overall control. Better news for them in Walsall and in North East Lincolnshire, where they gained both these councils. For Labour as well, a very mixed picture. They lost control of Bolsover. That's now become an independent council. A group of independents have won there. And in Wirral, this is also a Labour loss. And let me just go in and show you what happened there. Labour short by 2, although they were the largest party. They were short by 2. And let me just show you the Labour losses there. So they lost 4 seats. Perhaps even more interestingly is the share change. And this is, you can see in terms of the share of the vote, Labour losing 13% of the share, and the Greens being a clear beneficiary, gaining 12% of the share. But just back to that main screen again, better news for Labour in Trafford, where they had been in a minority administration and they are now in overall control of Trafford.
Rita Chakrabarti there. Well, if you want to get a take on life, the universe, the price of apples and a bit of politics as well, where better to go to than a market? Let's head to the West Midlands, and our correspondent Phil Mackey is in Dudley Market right now. Phil, bring us up to date with what's been happening there.
Well, Dudley is one of those really key marginal seats in Westminster elections. Dudley North is held by Labour, Dudley South held by the Conservatives. Last night, no real clear victors. The Conservatives lost control by 1 seat to no overall control, so it's a dead level, a dead heat, with 36 councillors for Labour and 36 for the Conservatives. But it's likely the Conservatives will be able to continue in power with the casting vote of the Mayor for another year. Elsewhere in the West Midlands, again, no clear winners. Conservatives probably happier than Labour, although Labour did well in Telford and Wrekin, gaining a bigger majority there. The Conservatives have won Walsall from no overall control. The Conservatives lost Worcester to no overall control. The Greens hold the balance of party there. UKIP made a bit of a comeback in the Black Country, where it used to do very well but didn't really win any seats. The Greens, as I said, hold the balance of power in Worcester, but there were some independent parties like the Black Country Party here in Dudley, which polled well, didn't win any seats, but may become a force in the future. I've got Corin Crane with me. He's the the Chief Executive of the Black Country Chamber of Commerce. Now, it's a local election. I guess what impact does that have on an area that is really big into manufacturing and particularly thinking about exports, when it looks like people have kind of voted on a national rather than a local basis, mostly about Brexit?
And I think it's a real shame. I mean, clearly there needs to be a bigger debate around Brexit, but at a local level, we really want this sort of a council with a clear mandate to address some of those local issues. We know the manufacturing's struggling at the moment. We know we've got some big issues around importing, but in an area like Dudley, we've got a massive regeneration agenda to push through. Our school improvement needs to be done. We're about late payments from businesses, and what we want is a council focusing on the task locally, not another hung parliament for them.
And you kind of almost didn't care who won, but you wanted someone to win to have a majority to get on with things, and fear that maybe with a borough so closely fought like this, that there will be no clear leadership.
Yeah, and I think in Dudley area, one of the nice things about the two councils is actually the two parties is they work very closely together on some of those big issues. But you need a real clear majority, don't you? And you want the local voters to give them a mandate. This is what we want from you around business, around some of those big issues. And sometimes this is just a big distraction for them.
And what do you make of like the Black Country Party I just talked about very briefly? They fielded a few candidates. They did quite well. They didn't win any, but there's a sign that people are perhaps turning away from the big parties in local elections.
Yeah, I think nationally that seems to be the trend, doesn't it? There seems to be more of an impact on those independents, on some of the Lib Dems and some of those independent parties. People seem really fed up with politics at the moment, and certainly the old-fashioned way of doing things. And maybe actually there's no overall control is a way of the future. You know, if people have to barter at a more local level.
OK, thanks very much, Corin. Thanks for joining us this morning. Obviously, this was an area that voted very strongly to leave at the referendum 3 years ago, and there is some early indication. I've seen some analysis that suggests that UKIP, particularly, which has picked up votes again, picked them up more from Labour than the Conservatives, but I don't think there's any kind of clear message being sent from Dudley or the West Midlands today. It's pretty much the same as things were before.
OK, Phil, thank you very much for that. No clear message from Dudley, from the West Midlands, says Phil. But are we getting any clearer messages? What can the parties extrapolate from the votes so far? Let's get the thoughts now of the Guardian's columnist Don Foster and Henry Zefferman, political correspondent for The Times. It's very good to have you both here with me today. Let's talk about the Conservatives first of all. So is this voters saying to the Conservatives that they're fed up with Brexit, or that they're fed up with the party's handling of Brexit and the fact that it hasn't been delivered so far? Dawn, I'll begin with you.
Annoyingly, it seems to be both. So a lot of people are very annoyed that it's taken so long, that there's no clear path forward, that we voted for Brexit years ago and nothing's happened. But there are also a number of people who don't want it to happen at all, and you can see that in the massive growth in independent and Lib Dem supporters. So I remember ordinarily people were saying that people should vote Lib Dem if they wanted to stop Brexit. Didn't happen previously, but it is now.
And Henry, that really interesting result, to go back to it, we've already talked about it a little bit today, in northeast Somerset. 23 Conservative councillors out, Lib Dems take control. Let's remind everyone, this is the Westminster seat of Jacob Rees-Mogg.
That's right. I mean, one of the really striking things about the results that we've had so far is how much of a bloody nose the Conservatives have been given in Remain voting areas. Remember, Remain voting areas, there are still lots of them that vote Conservative at general elections. It's not just Bath and North East Somerset. In Maidenhead, which of course the MP here in Westminster is Theresa May, the Lib Dems, they haven't taken control, but they have absolutely surged. But, we should be careful of thinking it's just Remain voting Conservatives who are annoyed with the Tories. They have lost council seats pretty much everywhere. Urban areas, rural areas, Leave voting areas, Remain voting areas. It's what happens when you've been in government for 9 years, but it's also what happens when you're pushing through, or failing to push through, a deeply divisive policy.
And Dawn, should Labour be doing better than they are, or is this pretty much as we expected because of the divisions within the party over Brexit there as well?
I think because Labour's position is a kind of fudge that attempts to appeal to both, then you will get people who just aren't finding it appealing to them at all. So I think it's kind of expected that this would happen because of how Labour have tried to equivocate over and over again. And when you look at them in comparison to the Tories, it's clear that the Tories are much worse off.
We're nearly out of time, but very briefly, Henry, a thought on, at the risk of sounding like a blockbuster movie, the rise of the independents. I think 200 plus of them. I mean, that's a pretty amazing result, isn't it?
Yes, absolutely. I think people are fed up with both parties. I don't actually think it's what we expected from the Labour Party. They were hoping for hundreds of gains, not losses. And I think, it shows that both major parties at Westminster are struggling to connect with lots of people.
OK, Henry Zeffman from The Times and Dawn Foster from The Guardian. Thank you both very much for your thoughts today. So many interesting things to talk about. And so many results still to come in, and we will be heading around England and indeed to Northern Ireland as well to take stock of what's going on. We'll say goodbye now to viewers on BBC Two, and let's take a look at the weather with Simon King.
Thank you, Anita. Well, it's looking dry there at the moment in London, but further north we've got some showery outbreaks of rain. It's been a rather grim start today across northern areas, and it's all because we've got this weather front which is moving its way southward. Now, the other thing this weather front is doing, is a cold one, is bringing colder air in from the north, so a notable difference across much of Scotland, Northern Ireland and northern parts of England. We'll even see some snow showers in the far northeast of Scotland. That showery rain will continue to spread its way southward, but there will be some brighter skies in the far south of England during this afternoon. But you notice that we've got this northerly wind. That's bringing in that colder air. So temperatures across many of these northern parts about 7 to 10 degrees, just holding on to the milder air at this point in the afternoon at 14 or 15. But gradually through tonight, those showers will continue to feed their way southward. Further showers coming in on that northerly wind, which will be wintry again over Scotland, the North York Moors. But the main thing about tonight is this blue developing across northern areas, a frost into Saturday morning. Further south, not quite as cold, temperatures 5 or 6 degrees Celsius, but it will certainly be a bit of a chilly start to the day for many of us, and there will be a frost around, you can see there, but also some sunshine. So for most, a glorious start to the day, but all of us will be under the influence of this northerly wind. That air is coming from Iceland and from the Arctic, so temperatures way below the average for the time of year. But as I mentioned, it's a sunny start for many of us. There'll be a few showers across the eastern parts of England, northeastern Scotland, also 1 or 2 showers. For most of us, though, on Saturday, it's going to be a dry day, however, and there will be those sunny spells, a bit more cloud into the afternoon. Temperatures, though, 7 to 10 or 11 degrees. High pressure out towards the west. That's what's bringing this cold northerly wind in across the UK, but it's also bringing us mostly settled weather. So again on Sunday, yes, a chilly start, but it'll be a bright start, plenty of sunshine, cloud tending to build up as the afternoon goes on. So a cloudier afternoon than morning, a few showers in the far north. Otherwise, though, a dry day again. Temperatures, well, 7 to 13 degrees Celsius. And then into Bank Holiday Monday. Well, again, lots of cloud. There could be a few showers across the northern parts, some sunny spells. Temperatures still below the average for the time of year, around about 8 to 13 degrees Celsius. Bear in mind that last year's early May bank holiday, we had temperatures up to 28.7 degrees. Bye-bye.
In a world of complex global news stories, we'll sift through the information to bring you what matters most. And with reaction and reporting in real time,
our immigration laws are a laughingstock all over the world.
You'll know what's happening around the world as we do.
And that these new measures won't actually stop Venezuelans coming over, it will just make the migrant crisis worse.
Whatever the story, we'll piece it together on Outside Source. Join me, Ros Atkins, Monday to Thursday at 9 on the BBC News Channel.
You're watching a BBC News election special with me, Joanna Gosling, as we bring you the results of local elections which have been taking place in England and Northern Ireland. It's bad news for both the Conservatives and Labour as voters turn away from the two main parties.
Sadly, the big parties are being punished for what's happening over Brexit, and they're forgetting the local issues.
The message we are getting loud and clear is all about Brexit, and the residents are telling us they're going to make sure there's some change because of their dissatisfaction over Brexit.
It's been a good night for the Liberal Democrats, the Greens and independent candidates. The Lib Dems have made significant gains in results announced so far.
It's a fantastic morning. Liberal Democrats are back in business. To be put in context, I think this is a sea change. I think voters have been desperate for a strong alternative to the Conservatives and Labour.
I'm Annita McVeigh live at Westminster. They may have been local elections, but national politics seem to have been a deciding factor for voters, with both Conservatives and Labour hit by an apparent Brexit backlash. There are calls for Theresa May to go after the difficult night for her party, which many are putting down to her handling of Brexit.
I just don't think we can continue like this. I've been very clear, quite frankly. Many of my constituents have said this to me, you know, we need change. We need a change of leadership. Perhaps the time has now come for that.
We will bring you all the overnight results, including full analysis of why the Tories and Labour suffered those losses and what is behind the gains for the Lib Dems as the daytime counts begin. Good morning. We're bringing you a BBC News special on the results coming in from yesterday's local elections. Voters have punished the Conservatives and Labour in early results in England in what appears to be a protest against the deadlock over Brexit at Westminster. Overnight, it quickly became clear that the smaller parties, such as the Liberal Democrats and the Greens and independent candidates, were winning seats around the country. Nearly 100 of the 248 councils up for election have declared their results. Counting in the remaining authorities, as well as in Northern Ireland, will take place later. So let's take a look at the results so far. We'll look at the number of councillors first up, and you can see their heavy losses for the Conservatives, losing 442 seats, and losses also for Labour, down 79 seats. The real winners there, the Liberal Democrats, up 304 seats. Ed Davey for the Lib Dems saying it is a turning point for them. The Greens also up, and the Independents up 215 in the 69 councils where they fielded candidates. They took around 25% of the vote. UKIP down 54, but that is some of these figures are mostly reflecting on a previous high for the parties. Let's take a look at the councils in particular, where you can see again Labour and the Conservatives, of course, have lost. They've got almost the same number of councils so far, but don't forget, just under 45% of the vote has been counted, so a lot more councils still declare, and again you can see where the clear winners are. And some of the councils in particular are an area of interest in that the Liberal Democrats have taken councils in areas obviously that have been previously Conservative, and not much good news for the main parties, but Labour is celebrating the news that it's taken Trafford, and that's where Jeremy Corbyn, the Labour leader, has been out and about this morning, taking that council from the Tories. OK, let's get more on the story so far. Here's our political correspondent, Chris Mason.
To serve as member for
Results have trundled in throughout the night. There have been smiles and cheers, a hold in the battleground of Swindon for the Conservatives, and again in north-east Lincolnshire, but elsewhere not good news for them. The Tories losing control in places like St Albans, Southend, Broxtowe and Peterborough. We can hazard a guess how this couple voted, but what do the results mean for the Prime Minister?
I think she needs to take a look at how many councillors we've lost overnight, wake up in the morning and think about how she thinks the Conservative Party needs to put its best foot forward.
These ballot boxes brought good news for Labour, where they took control of Trafford in Greater Manchester. But the party lost control of councils in Hartlepool and Bolsover. A sense in some areas that it wasn't the night they'd hoped for.
It's not looking good. This is going to be a very difficult night for Labour. We've been out and about across the borough, and the message we are getting loud and clear is all about Brexit, and the residents are telling us they're going to make sure there's some change because of their dissatisfaction over Brexit.
So far, it's been good news for the smaller parties like the Liberal Democrats and the Greens, as well as local independents who are on the advance. The Lib Dems have gained areas like North Norfolk, Winchester and the Cotswolds.
Actually feeling pretty buoyant. We're seeing a lot of our vote coming out, and the national picture, of course, is really tough for the Tories.
So, smiling Lib Dems and smiling Greens as well.
We've had a very, very good night so far. We've gained a lot of new seats, and importantly on a lot of new councils where people have never elected Greens before, and these are right across the country in places you wouldn't expect.
However, there's a long way to go yet. This is a big set of local elections, and the parties are watching closely, peering into what it might mean for their wider fortunes. Here, in the wee small hours though, some cross-party collaboration, or perhaps commiseration. On it goes, verdicts being delivered, one ballot box after another. They were eager to get going here, democracy in energetic action, and plenty more energy will be needed throughout the day. Chris Mason, BBC News.
Well, as we have been hearing, the poor performance of both Labour and the Conservatives in the local elections in England is being blamed on a Brexit backlash. Let's get some more reaction to the results with Annita McVeigh in Westminster. Hi, Annita.
Hi again, Joanna. Yes, we've definitely heard that, the idea of a Brexit backlash. But, you know, what exact messages will the parties be taking from the voting with, you know, Remain supporting parties doing better in some areas, but obviously losses as well for the Conservatives and Labour in Brexit supporting areas too. Let's get the thoughts of our assistant political editor Norman Smith on all of that. Yeah, what message will the parties take from this in terms of their direction from here on in? What can they extrapolate from these votes?
I mean, that's one of the extraordinary things. Both the main parties agree they've taken an almighty Brexit kicking. Have they any idea what to do? Actually, no, I don't think so. If you look at the Labour side, I mean, there's no doubt they've suffered a backlash in their Leave supporting heartlands in northern seats like Hartlepool, Sunderland, Barnsley, Ashworth, Bolsover, the home of Dennis Skinner, losing control there by, you know, predominantly Leave supporting Labour voters who clearly just thought, you guys are not delivering on Brexit, we're going to put our vote elsewhere. Now, there are two ways this could go. You could say that, all right, what we've got to do is we've got to do a deal with Theresa May. We've got to get Brexit over the line. That way we can move on to our favoured agenda of austerity. That is one argument. The danger is half the party, the Remain half of the party, would then explode. And they are saying, no, 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 the lesson from last night's vote is if you look where our voters went, they went to the Liberal Democrats, they went to the Greens, they are Remainers. Therefore, actually, our people are moving to Remain. So both sides of the Labour divide remain divided. What is the party going to do? Genuinely, I don't think there is anything approaching what could tentatively be described as a consensus. And if you listen to those Labour MPs in Leave supporting areas, they are pretty clear that Mr Corbyn now needs to deliver on Brexit. Have a listen to Ruth Smith, the MP for Stoke, where I think they lost, 5 councillors.
My constituents just don't believe that we'll deliver Brexit. I represent a seat that is 73% Leave. And what is quite clear, especially if you look at the spoilt ballot papers this evening, is that it was, we don't trust you, UKIP, 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 and we haven't got very many UKIP candidates standing here this time. They'd have done very well if they had. And a huge amount of independent support, which is, anyone but the Tories or us. So it's been a really, really tough set of results so far. Some brilliant local councillors have lost their seats, and my frustration is that we seem to have just abandoned them. No matter how hard we're working locally, we need clear messaging from the top, and playing around just isn't working.
Norman, a painful night, potentially a painful day for the Conservatives, heading towards 500 losses at the moment. How high could that figure go?
I think the pain's going to get a lot worse for the Tories, because they've talked about losing 1,000 seats. I think they could lose 1,000 seats. They're halfway there. Most of the seats being announced today are in rural areas, so they're predominantly Tory seats, so the potential for making losses are much bigger. So stand by for the Tories to hit the big 1000, which psychologically is a big blow. But, they face exactly the same question mark about Brexit. Half the party, the sort of May loyalists, think, well, maybe this will be the moment when everyone realises we've got to deliver, and therefore we'll have to agree some sort of Theresa May deal. Then you get the others, the Brexiteers, saying Theresa May would be the equivalent of Ramsay MacDonald, the famous Labour Prime Minister, of course, who went into a deal with the Tories and was reviled for ever and a day afterwards. Already we're seeing Brexiteers coming out and saying she's got to go. She is the problem. The only thing they seem agreed on is one way or another they've got to get round Brexit. How they do that, answers came then none from the party chairman, Brandon Lewis.
I absolutely accept that there is huge frustration, not just with our members and activists, but the public around where Parliament and we have got ourselves to on delivering on Brexit. And I think there is a very clear message to both parties that we've got to get on with getting Brexit done. And one of the things we've seen, interestingly, if you look at those seats, some of those Leave areas where we've made some gains, Labour heartlands actually, where they're losing out, there is a definite frustration with people who want to see this done. Now, I have to say on the doorsteps that there's been mixed comments from people. I have to say on doorsteps, a lot of people talking about local issues, but you're right, when they talk about Brexit, it's frustration we haven't got it done.
Brandon Lewis there, and looking at the figures on the screen, you can see Independents up 215 seats, the Lib Dems up 304 seats. Let me just show you a tweet from the Lib Dem leader, Sir Vince Cable, in the last few minutes. He says on his way to Chelmsford to celebrate best Lib Dems local election results in at least 15 years in big cities and in rural England. In both Leave and Remain areas, we have shown ourselves the strongest campaigning force and the big winners of the night. Three-party politics is back, declares Sir Vince Cable. Norman, a thought on how the Lib Dems are doing, and in those rural constituencies which have been supporting the Conservatives that are due to return today, are voters there going to move to the Lib Dems? And if so, what message does that give? You're talking about a Brexit supporting party and a Remain supporting party.
I mean, the Lib Dems have done well, no doubt about it. If you look at a place like northeast Somerset, Jacob Rees-Mogg, I mean, they wiped out something like 20 Tory councillors, so they have done well. But I kind of think, the goal is in front of them, there's nowhere in it, you just have to bang it in, because last time was about their worst results ever. If they can't beat Labour and the Tories now, when they're flat on the back, when are they going to do it? So really, yes, they had to get some decent results. The real test, I think, for them is going to come in a fortnight's time when Change UK enter the fray, competing for exactly the same sort of votes. And that will be a test of whether people do think, as Ed Davey and others were saying, that the Lib Dems are the voice of Remain, or actually whether they're beginning to be crowded out. But, you know, in a way, last night and today are kind of the aperitif before the main course, which is the Euro elections in a fortnight's time. And I suspect, for all the grief and horror and misery that the two main parties have suffered overnight, I mean, it's just going to be, oh, so much worse in a fortnight's time.
OK, Norman, thank you very much for that. Yes, those European elections certainly giving the voters another opportunity to send a message to all the parties. Well, joining me now from Leeds is the Shadow Justice Secretary, Richard Bergen. Very good morning to you, and thank you for your time this morning. What's your assessment of the results so far? Clearly, in ordinary circumstances, in normal times, this is not how Labour would hope to be doing at this stage in the election cycle. Of course, we're not in exactly normal times, are we?
Well, it's a mixed night for Labour. It could have been better for us, and of course I wish it had been better for us. But the last time I looked, the Conservatives have lost 450 seats, and half of the seats are yet to be counted. And it's actually not since the dark days of John Major that the Conservatives have lost 500 or more seats in one local election. So it's a mixed night for Labour. We've consolidated in some areas, made gains in places like Peterborough, Stevenage, Southend, Basildon, which we need to win at the next general election. But I would have liked to have seen a better night for Labour, obviously.
But look at the North East. What's the message from there? Those areas, by and large, very strongly supporting Leave in the European referendum. What is that saying to the party? Is it saying to Jeremy Corbyn that he needs to get on and make a deal with Theresa May?
Well, I think that both main parties, the Conservatives and Labour, should both take from these results that there's a sense of real frustration out there, and that's actually why I think independents and challengers have done quite well in these local elections. People are just frustrated at Parliament, frustrated at Westminster, and actually, you know, we've got that message, and something does need to be sorted.
But, you know, if that was the direction that Jeremy Corbyn was to go in, that's going to anger a lot of other Labour voters, isn't it?
Well, of course, it's difficult when you're a party that represents both communities that voted Remain and communities that voted Leave. We're doing the right thing by trying to bring people together, but obviously that presents real difficulties. But we think it's the right thing to do to bring people together and hopefully then get on to issues other than Brexit, because I think this local election is, as you say, atypical in a number of ways. One of those being that Brexit is really overshadowing many of the issues such as wages, public services, housing and the rest of it. And I think people are frustrated that Parliament's actually not getting onto those issues in the way that it should be.
Do you really think Jeremy Corbyn potentially making a deal with Theresa May, potentially, is going to be the way to bring people together? Is the way to bring them together not to get Labour to, fundamentally say, yes, it will support a confirmatory referendum on any deal?
Well, Labour's not going to just accept or support any deal. We've made that clear. We've made clear what we want from any Brexit deal, and as it stands, the Prime Minister hasn't come forward with that. We're not going to be pushed into lurches in position because of mixed local election results, but we're clearly listening. And I think the Conservatives should listen as well, because they've done very, very badly tonight. A mixed night for us, could have been better. Very bad night for them so far. But we need to listen, and we are doing that. There's frustration with Westminster and the main political parties, because I think of people's frustration that Brexit is dragging on and on and on. And lots of people, whether they voted Remain or Leave, want it sorting.
Where you've suffered losses, where have your votes gone? Do you have a clear picture of that yet?
Well, I want to analyse that further and not be precipitous with any analysis of exactly where our votes have gone. I think independents across the country have done well, and I think it varies from area to area. I see that analysis does show that there's been a swing to Labour in the south, a swing to Labour in the northwest, and that obviously is welcome. The northwest is an area that we need to win, but there have been disappointing results as well, but we've consolidated gains we've previously made in Plymouth, Southampton, and as I say, Stevenage, Basildon, Peterborough, Southend. We've made advances there, and we need to make advances there if we're going to win the next general election.
OK, Richard Bergen, Shadow Justice Secretary, joining us from Leeds. Thank you very much. And here with me in Westminster is Professor Tony Travers, Professor at the London School of Economics, specialising in local government. Appropriately enough, very good to see you, Tony.
Me too.
Let's talk about the psychology of what's going on here, the psychology of voting, because that's really fascinating in this election, that we've seen, moves away in some areas from Labour or the Conservatives to the Lib Dems, especially interesting where you have, the Leave backing Conservatives losing votes to the Remain backing Liberal Democrats. So what's been going on?
Well, it looks as if Brexit inevitably has had a role in these elections, but the question of what the role is and how it influences the way votes have moved is going to be analysed for some time to come, because it looks as if in some parts of the country, in the north in particular, where Labour's not done so well, their vote is sort of fractured and fragmented to a number of different parties, including independents. It's not often we talk about it being a good night for independents, but it has been. UKIP haven't done so well, so it looks as if Brexit's played a role, and it'll play a different role in different parts of the country. Difficult for Labour in the north, but I think we'll see more, and later today, difficult and unhelpful for the Conservatives in the south, and helping the Liberal Democrats in parts of the south, and particularly the west of England.
You say UKIP hasn't done so well. We haven't talked too much about UKIP so far today, but obviously they were coming from a pretty poor base in terms of the last cycle of elections, and they were fielding far fewer candidates than they did last time round. But, come the European elections, the Brexit Party, what do you think its chances are?
Well, there is a fascinating hypothetical, and something we can't quite answer in these elections. If the Brexit Party and Change UK, the other new party, had stood in these elections, I suspect they'd have damaged the Conservatives and Labour even more than they've been damaged in these elections so far. So I think when we get to the Euro elections, the Brexit Party will do significantly better, this is what the polling shows, than UKIP has done in these elections. And it is fascinating that despite Brexit being an overlay for what are local elections, it looks as if most of the disenchantment with the political system here at Westminster has fractured between the Liberal Democrats, Independents, Greens. It's gone all over the place, but not so much to UKIP. OK, so the two main parties, of course, don't have very long to wait to find out what impact, what the message is that the voters deliver at those European elections. Do you think they'll bide their time, if you like, for a few weeks and see what the message is there and then decide what to do next? We've already heard, a lot of discontent from some Conservatives saying that Theresa May and her handling of Brexit is to blame for their losses and she needs to go. Well, I think both the Conservative Party and the Labour Party, if they stand back from this result, will actually think that the electorate wants them to get on with some kind of Brexit. And so, in the sense, they now have a common interest in finding a way of sorting Brexit out before the Euro elections in 3 weeks' time. Whether they can actually bring themselves to do that is not clear yet. So neither party's done very well. Neither of those parties have done well here. And what can independents, what can the Liberal Democrats in particular do to build on this result? The Lib Dems obviously have got the challenge coming from Change UK in the European elections, even though they're essentially, singing from the same hymn sheet in terms of their backing for the European Union, for the UK's membership of it. What the Lib Dems were always good at, in the long years after the 70s, in which they built up at the local level and then were able to win parliamentary seats, is they were great at on-the-ground campaigning. And it looks as if, after the bad years during the coalition between 2010 and 2015, they're beginning to be able to rebuild that local machine. They have a local machine. Change UK don't have a machine of that kind. And so when it comes to these parties are going to have to think, as the Social Democrats and the Liberals did in the past, about whether they fight each other or work together as a common front, I think, because the Lib Dems are good at gradually building their way back. They've done this before, and I suspect today is going to be evidence that they're doing it again at the local level, and then it helps them at Westminster later on.
OK, Tony, good to talk to you. Professor Tony Travers from the London School of Economics. Well, Labour has won overall control of Trafford Council in Greater Manchester for the first time in over a decade. That's certainly a symbolic victory, and one that the Labour Party has been talking up. The Labour leader Jeremy Corbyn is there this morning to congratulate the newly elected Labour councillors, and we were listening a few minutes ago to what he had to say.
We lost 80 councillors, and I'm very sorry about that, and I thank them for their services. The Conservatives...
And that's a bad night for Labour.
Wait a minute. Oh, you're very too excited. The Conservatives lost 500 and lost control of a lot of councils.
Losing seats at this point in the electoral cycle is not a good night for Labour.
We have won Trafford to an overall majority. We have swings to Labour in a number of boroughs across the whole of councils across the whole of the country, and that gives us a basis on which we can win marginal seats, such as Swindon, such as Thurrock, and other places. And I'm looking forward to an election that we do that. But also only half the results have come in yet.
Trafford is the exception of the night, though. You've lost control of Bolsover, you've lost control of Hartlepool, you've lost control of Wirral, Walsall. These are Labour heartlands.
I'm very sorry we lost them. We'll fight back and we'll win them back. That's the whole point behind it. What we are doing here is putting forward an agenda of anti-austerity and also pointing out that local authorities have borne the brunt of the austerity agenda which has been foisted on them by the Conservatives and the Lib Dems when they were in coalition together.
And off the back of that, perhaps you should have done better. Andrew Gwynn, your own Shadow Secretary of State for Local Government, said that Labour expected and hoped to do better. Do you accept that?
Of course we wanted to do better. Of course we did. We always want to do better. That's why we're in politics for. That's what we exist for. We are going to campaign and continue to campaign to try and keep and bring people together in negotiations over Brexit, but also to oppose austerity and put forward an agenda which actually deals with the injustices that exist in this country in housing and so many other areas.
Bolton, Bolsover, Hartlepool, why do you think we lost in these council areas?
A number of reasons. Some of them were local factors, and some of them were people probably disagreeing with both parties on attitudes towards the European Union. Our policy is that we're the only party that seeks to appeal to people however they voted in 2016, and to ensure that we try to defend jobs and working conditions in this country. That's actually quite an important agenda.
And in trying to appeal to everybody, you failed to please anybody.
You're assuming that everybody is totally divided because of how they voted in 2016. Our purpose is to try to bring people together and keep to bring people together so that we do have an intelligent relationship with Europe in the future. We don't have a terrible loss of jobs if we have a no-deal exit from the European Union.
Is this really a failure of politicians from major parties to deliver anything on Brexit at all?
Well, the referendum took place in 2016. Parliament has been unable to reach an agreement on where we go from here, and that's why there have been there's been an opportunity for us to put our views to the government, and that we're doing. If there's no agreement reached, then we will bring it back to Parliament and try to get an agreement there.
Jeremy Corbyn there in Sale, marking the Labour Party's gain of Trafford Council. Let me just tell you that in the next half an hour we will be heading out around the country a bit more to get reaction from Great Yarmouth and Warwick, amongst other places throughout the day. Right now, back to you, Joanna, from Westminster.
Thank you very much, Annita, and we will continue to take a closer look at some of the significant results of the night. One that defied the trend for the Conservatives was that they gained control of North East Lincolnshire Council for the first time since the authority was formed. Labour had previously run the council with Liberal Democrat support, as no party had a majority. The council was formed in 1996 and it is the first time the Conservatives have won a majority there. A third of North East Lincolnshire seats were being contested. Our political editor for Yorkshire and Lincolnshire, Tim Iredale, explains more.
This is a result few would have predicted before the polling stations opened. Previously, Labour was the dominant party in North East Lincolnshire, and before these elections Labour ran the council with the help of the Liberal Democrats. But all that's changed after a string of Conservative gains here, and it means the Tories now have full control of this Grimsby-based authority. This is an area heavily supportive of Brexit. In the 2016 referendum, almost 70% opted to leave the EU. But voters have chosen not to punish the Conservatives in North East Lincolnshire, but instead Labour are the biggest losers here.
Well, looking at the overall figures for the individual parties, the Liberal Democrats are the winners of the night. They have increased the number of seats that they had previously by 150% so far. Portsmouth City Council, the party has won. Let's just go through this result. The Conservatives and the Liberal Democrats went into the election both holding 17 seats, with the Labour Party supporting a Lib Dem-led administration. The Lib Dems gained 2 seats with 28% of the vote. Labour gained 1 and the Conservatives lost 3, still leaving no party in overall control. The political editor for the South of England, Peter Henley, has more.
Here in Portsmouth, it's finished with Labour making gains and the Liberal Democrats. The Conservatives, though, haven't lost as many seats as they would have expected. And the turnout stayed a lot higher than people thought. They put that down to local issues. People know that this council is tight and that their votes count here. And they count on things like a controversial residents' parking scheme, about a district energy idea, which the Liberal Democrats scrapped. In each ward as well, people here know their councillors, and they know that the result of this election was important to Portsmouth. So whilst Brexit kept some people at home, for others they came out, and turnout in the end was comparable to previous years. So another exciting election, a local election here in Portsmouth,
where the Liberal Democrats are now the largest party on the City Council. We will bring you much more results and analysis. Right now, though, let's catch up with the weather with Simon.
Hi there, good morning. The bank holiday weekend is nearly upon us, and if you've got plans, take note, because it's going to turn much colder compared to recent days, certainly much colder than last year's early May bank holiday. We've got this cold front moving its way southward, introducing Arctic air right across the UK as we go into the weekend. Showery rain across central areas, drifting its way further south, but it'll stay quite cloudy for many of us. But you can see those temperatures across northern parts, 7 to 11 degrees Celsius. Further south, holding on to some milder conditions with a bit of sunshine in the far southwest. We'll continue with some showers through the night, but those mostly clear away. Further winter showers into northeast Scotland, northeast England. Look at the blues here, a frost across northern parts through tonight. There'll be some clear skies to take us into Saturday morning, a bright start to the day, but there'll be some showers in eastern areas. But look at those temperatures, 10 to 13 degrees. Bye-bye.
India is going to the polls, with nearly 900 million voters expected to turn up at the ballots for the world's largest democratic exercise. So what can we expect from this election?
We'll be travelling to every corner of this vast country, speaking to voters. Chat about everything from business to lifestyle. And look at how recent challenges may affect the results.
For full coverage of the 2019 India elections, join us online and here at BBC News.
Good morning. We're bringing you a BBC News special on the results coming in from yesterday's local elections. Voters have punished the Conservatives and Labour in early results in England in what appears to be a protest against the deadlock over Brexit at Westminster. Overnight, it quickly became clear that the smaller parties, such as the Liberal Democrats and Greens and independent candidates, were winning seats around the country. Nearly 100 of the 248 councils up for election have declared their results. Counting in the remaining authorities, as well as in Northern Ireland, will take place later. Let's take a look at the latest results, and we can focus first of all on the total number of councillors, and you can see there the headline figures for the Conservatives and Labour both down. The Tories have so far lost about a quarter of the seats they were defending. Labour have lost about 8% of the seats they were defending, and Labour were defending a relatively poor result. The Liberal Democrats have increased the number of seats that they have by 150%, and you can see there their standout result on that page is that they've increased their number of councillors by 304. The other part of the story, of course, is what's happened with independents, up 215, and the Greens up 42. The message that analysts are saying these results send is a plague on both your houses for the Conservatives and Labour. And UKIP are down as well, down 54 seats there. So let's take a look at what this means for the individual councils. And Labour have lost 2 councils. The Conservatives lost more, 16. They're down so far. And the Liberal Democrats, as we've been saying, are the winners. They've gone up 8 councils, no overall control, up by 8. And the Independents have 1 control of 2 councils. And if we look specifically at some of the individual councils that are of particular interest, Labour, we've just been seeing Jeremy Corbyn out in Trafford. They won control of Trafford, formerly a Conservative stronghold, but they've lost control of some of their other previous strongholds, Hartlepool, Bolsover and Wirral, notable amongst them. Just focusing in actually on that result in Trafford, Labour gaining there, as you can see. And we were hearing, as I say, Jeremy Corbyn basically saying that is a good result for Labour, but a good result amidst a pretty bleak picture, not just for Labour, but for the Tories as well. Liberal Democrats are celebrating. Ed Davey of the Liberal Democrats saying their fortunes have changed. Whether this rolls out, because, I mean, if you take away the Brexit factor, these might look to be fairly traditional results that would reflect local council elections at any time. The Liberal Democrats, the parties away from the main parties doing well, but there is no denying the Liberal Democrats have done very well overnight. They've won 8 councils, including Winchester, North Norfolk, Cotswold and Bath and North East Somerset. So what all the parties will obviously be doing now is analysing what these results mean for them and what they need to do to change their fortunes going forward. The question, particularly for Labour, what does it start to now say that it will offer a confirmatory vote on Brexit, or does it work harder to get some sort of a deal with the Tories on Brexit? Because the next stop after these elections is those European elections on the 23rd of May. Well, we will return to the election results shortly, but first let's take a look at the rest of the day's news. More than 1 million people along India's northeast coast are sheltering in relief centres as the area is battered by the worst summer cyclone there for more than 40 years. Trees have been uprooted and electricity poles felled. Winds of up to 200 kilometres an hour have been forecast, as well as a possible storm surge. Ramzan Kamali has the latest.
Cyclone Fani hits land, battering India's east coast. This is the town of Puri, home of the Jagannath Temple. It's been standing here for over 850 years. Officials may have been braced as Fani headed up the Bay of Bengal, but with winds expected to reach speeds of 220 kilometres an hour and 100 million people in its path, precautions were taken. Many in the most exposed areas sought safety. Around 1 million have been evacuated from low-lying regions. Hundreds of emergency shelters have been set up and schools and universities closed.
Now we are first trying to evacuate the pregnant women and the lactating mothers, and particularly the old people and people in thatched houses, because they are more prone to danger. So we are just trying to lessen the human casualties.
Forecasters tracked Fani's progress as the eye of the cyclone approached Odisha state.
This storm system has a number of hazards attached to it. We've got torrential rain, 200 or 300 millimetres of rain on this, and ahead of the storm we'll get a storm surge working in across parts of Odisha, West Bengal and even into parts of Bangladesh, and that poses the threat of some significant flooding as well.
Officials have been using these forecasts to help them plan emergency operations. Thousands of relief workers have been deployed, and the government has set up a relief and rescue fund worth over $150 million in anticipation. But those officials are also warning that many homes and infrastructure caught in Cyclone Fani's path are likely to be completely destroyed. Ramzan Karmali, BBC News.
Our correspondent Rahul Tandon is in the capital of Odisha, which is right in the path of the storm.
This is the fury of nature in one of India's poorest states. The cyclone hit this area at around 8 a.m. local time, and over the last hour, we've seen the wind speeds increase dramatically. In Puri, where the cyclone came in, speeds are up to 210 kilometers an hour. On Thursday, one of the largest evacuations that this area has ever seen took place. The authorities used tractors, boats, cars, any form of transport they could find to get people into safety, into those temporary shelters. The first part of that work has been done, but when this cyclone passes by, many people will have seen their lives destroyed. Their land will have been destroyed by the cyclone, and the boats they go fishing on will also be devastated. The work that this cyclone will leave behind will start when it passes from this area in a few hours' time.
A second man has been charged with the murder of 14-year-old Jaden Moody, who was knocked off a moped and stabbed in East London. Jaden from Waltham Forest was found injured in Leighton following reports of a road crash. 21-year-old Yusuf Dubbard from East London is expected to appear at Thames Magistrates Court later today. 18-year-old Ayub Majdaleen from the Wembley area has already been charged. The case is due to be sent to the Old Bailey on Tuesday. New research has found people receiving effective treatment for HIV cannot pass on the virus to their sexual partners. A study published in the Lancet Medical Journal looked at nearly 1,000 gay male couples and discovered no cases of HIV transmission over 8 years. The researchers say it's a powerful message which everyone should be aware of. 1 and 2 pence coins are to remain in circulation after the Treasury confirmed it had gone back on plans to get rid of them. The Chancellor Philip Hammond said even though technology had transformed banking, it was important to give people a choice and help those who rely entirely on cash, particularly the elderly, vulnerable and those living in rural areas. In Thailand, preparations are underway for the coronation of King Maha Vajiralongkorn. It starts this weekend with a lavish 3-day ceremony. This morning in Bangkok, the day began with a procession which brought the king's name plaque, horoscope and royal emblem from the Temple of the Emerald Buddha to the Royal Palace. As the day continues, there'll be further elaborate ceremonies. The actor Peter Mayhew, who played Chewbacca in the Star Wars films, has died at the age of 74. The 7'2" actor played the Wookiee warrior in the original Star Wars trilogy in the late 1970s and early 80s, as well as some later films. Paying tribute, Harrison Ford, who played Chewbacca's companion Han Solo, described Peter as a kind and gentle man, possessed of great dignity and noble character. Now let's go back to the local elections. 112 councils now announced. In the last hour, we've heard from the Labour leader Jeremy Corbyn, who played down suggestions that it had been a bad night for Labour. He pledged a fight back. This is how the Conservative MP Priti Patel has been reacting to the results for her party so far. She says the time has come for a change in leadership.
Do you think Theresa May needs to go?
Well, I think that is absolutely now the ultimate question, and I will reflect and play back many of the comments that I've had on the doorstep over certainly the last 3 weeks while I've been knocking on doors. People have very categorically said that, she is part of the problem. So I think, where we've got to now look at these results, look at our direction of travel going forward as a party. I think obviously our party leadership and our party nationally needs to look at the situation and make some very, very serious decisions now in terms of where we go.
Where would you like to see it go?
Well, I think we need change. I just don't think we can continue like this. I've been very clear, quite frankly. Many of my constituents have said this to me, we need change. We need a change of leadership. Perhaps the time has now come for that.
Priti Patel on what the results mean for her party. Let's just show you the result from Gateshead that's just come in. The results are going to be trickling in through today because there are still a number of results to go. 112 councils now declared. Gateshead, the last of them, 136 to go. Here's the result. Labour, they're still counting, but you can see clearly Labour are well ahead with 36 seats there. So holding that council. The Liberal Democrats have got 9 seats so far and no seats for the other parties standing in that election. So that's a hold for Labour. They've had one win so far. They've taken Trafford Council, a former Tory stronghold. So we'll continue to bring you results as they come in. Meanwhile, let's take a look at what the results indicate for the Liberal Democrats. They're the big winners of the night. They've made major gains. They've got 150% more seats than they had before these elections. So it is, they are saying, affirmation of their own approach. Earlier this morning, the Liberal Democrat MP, Sir Ed Davey, gave his reaction.
It's a fantastic morning. Liberal Democrats are back in business. To put it in context, I think this is a sea change. I think voters have been desperate for a strong alternative to the Conservatives and Labour, who've made such a mess of everything the last few years. And now voters have it. They've chosen the Liberal Democrats, not just to protest, but to put their faith in us around the country, in the north against Labour, in the south against the Conservatives. This was our best night for a generation. When John Major's Conservative government was in meltdown, we got good results. These results look, they may be as good as then. So these are historic in terms of Liberal Democrat success and victories. So, you know, on the back of this, we think it's a real clear signal to the British people that if you want to stop Brexit, you vote Liberal Democrat.
Ed Davey, delighted with those results for the Lib Dems, who have absolutely had the strongest performance of the night. The Greens and Independents doing well as well. Let's get some more reaction from Westminster. Annita McVeigh is there. Over to you, Annita.
Joanna, thank you. Yes, you were just mentioning the Green Party, and I have with me here now at Westminster Jonathan Bartley, co-leader of the Greens. One of my colleagues saw him walking past a little earlier, looking very happy, and unsurprisingly so. I think 48 councillors so far. That's up 42. The last time I looked, maybe that figure's gone up since then.
Right, well, things are changing all the time. It's been a phenomenal set of results so far. There's more to come. We've broken through on 16 new councils, really cementing our place as the fourth party in England in local government, and a real momentum, I think, going into the European elections. Of course, we're the biggest representation of any Remain party in the European Parliament at the moment.
So you say 16 councils where you've now got councillors where you didn't before. Why do you think you've managed to make those breakthroughs in those locations? Tell us where they are, some of them anyway.
Well, a lot of them have been just on the back of very, very hard work. I know there's this narrative around a protest vote, but we've known where these gains were going to come for a long time. When we have had Greens elected, people want to see more. They also want to have a Green on the council in the town hall because they know that a Green makes a difference. So places like South Tyneside, Sunderland, right down to Exeter, right around the country in places where you wouldn't necessarily expect Greens to be elected. We're really making those breakthroughs, holding the balance of power also in places like Worcester, so make a big difference.
When you analyse your vote, and obviously you will do in the days and weeks ahead, how can you be sure, you already talk about it not being a protest vote, how can you be sure that that protest vote isn't a factor?
Well, in the last 9 council elections, we've gained in 8. It's been very, very consistent. So over the last 9 years, we've gone up and up and up and up to that position as the fourth party now in local government. So we know that this is not a flash in the pan. This is something very, very concrete we've been building and building. Also, we know on the doorsteps, what was going to happen in these elections. We are breaking records. And remember that the base we're coming from was 2015. Those are the comparable elections 4 years ago that we're now fighting those seats again. That was when we had our own record-breaking general election result. So the bar was already very high. And then to have these kind of gains in this kind of context, I think is very, very reassuring and shows how much progress we're making.
Looking at the psychology of this vote, what do you, as a Remain supporting party, do with this? Because equally you have the Conservatives saying they're suffering because of a Brexit backlash, because they haven't delivered on Brexit yet. You have a number of Labour voices, senior Labour voices, saying that in areas where they've suffered, it's because the party also hasn't delivered on Brexit. Yet you have, these great results for yourselves. You have very strong showing for the Remain supporting Lib Dems as well. So what's going on here with the vote?
Well, it clearly is a Brexit backlash. It's been very disappointing to see Labour's equivocation, not backing a people's vote, not being a Remain party. With the Greens, you know what you're going to get. It's a very clear message. We want a people's vote. We want to remain in the European Parliament. And we've got 3 times as many MEPs as the Lib Dems. So we're going to be flying that flag going into the European elections. And I think a lot of people are responding to that. But also people saying, we're fed up. with the two big parties. They're equivocating, they're not being clear, they're prevaricating, and when they see local Greens in local councils making a difference, they know that what they're going to get is going to be solid, secure and clear.
But how is that going to feed into what happens with Brexit? Is it going to make a difference?
I think absolutely it's going to make a difference. I think a very clear message is being sent to the establishment parties, and let's not forget that there's been a long-term decline since the 1950s in the vote for the two big parties. 85%, 90% was what Labour and Conservatives were getting in the 1950s. That's gone down and down and down. We saw a bit of a blip in 2017, but the long-term trend is to look for more choice, look for people who will deliver, who will be clear, and will stand very, very clearly for the kind of country we want to be. And that's something that's not really being talked about. These elections are also about the kind of country we want to be. Do we want to be a compassionate, outward-facing country, or do we want to turn in on ourselves? And the Greens are very clear. In Europe, particularly, that climate change doesn't stop at the border. Climate change, the climate emergency is another thing in the background here, moving steadily into the foreground. They know that we're going to stand for things that matter, to be an open, inclusive country that works with our partners, and that's why they'll vote for us in the European elections too.
So do you think for the Greens this has been truly a local election in the sense, in the truest sense of the word? We've discussed earlier, these aren't very local elections, and that Brexit has actually dominated over issues of, bin collections, parks, and so forth.
I mean, there are those local issues. Clearly, people know that when they get Greens elected, we don't have that base vote that the big parties have, so we have to work for every single vote. It's been great to see us maintaining so many seats as well as making gains, so people recognising that we deliver, so there's a local factor. There's the climate emergency, which has been so big over the last few weeks. It's really come to prominence. We've been saying this a long time, where Greens lead, others follow, and now that's right up there in the agenda, so people have been voting on the back of that. And clearly, there's also the Remain vote, the cry, I think, for people's vote to sort out the mess that we see at Westminster at the moment.
OK, Jonathan Bartley, co-leader of the Green Party, thank you very much for your time today. And let's get a snapshot now of results from around England. We can go to Warwick, to the BBC's political editor in the Midlands, Patrick Burns, in Great Yarmouth. It's Andrew Sinclair, political correspondent for BBC East. And also, it's South East Today's John Young, who is in Brighton for us. Patrick, to you first of all, good to see you, Patrick. What's been happening there?
Well, a very interesting picture is starting to emerge here, Anita, actually, because the story, as we know, of these elections so far is the Liberal Democrats. And there's been a strong suggestion that this may not be so much about the Remain sentiment, more a reversion to the old protest vote that the Liberal Democrats enjoyed for many years before they went into coalition with the Conservatives. Well, here in the West Midlands, which, as you know, voted overwhelmingly in the referendum to leave the European Union, there were just 3 places which voted to remain. Cotswold was one of them, down there in Gloucestershire, at the very bottom of our patch. And in Gloucestershire, the Liberal Democrats have gained control from the Conservatives. So the Liberal Democrats, I'm sure, will be able to join the dots and say that that has much more to do with Remain sentiment than some sort of just bland blanket protest vote. And to reinforce that, here in Warwick, which at the moment in the outgoing authority had a Conservative majority, there are some very strong suggestions that there's some serious damage to both the Conservatives and to Labour here, and indeed some are suggesting that the Liberal Democrats could be challenging to become the largest party here as well. And guess what? Warwick was one of those other places that voted to remain in the European Union. It actually sent in a bit of a shock, actually, in the 2017 general election. A Labour MP, Matt Weston, won this off the Conservatives, and he is a very strong Remain-supporting Labour MP. So a fascinating picture here. The Conservatives, I should point out, are not without some areas to celebrate, becoming the largest party in Stoke-on-Trent. Who would have thought it? Very traditional Labour voting area where Labour chose to launch their whole campaign for these local elections. So that coalition between the Conservatives and the City Independents in Stoke looks set to fight another day. Bear in mind that Worcester was lost by the Conservatives last night, overnight. So that reinforces a place right in many ways not dissimilar to Warwick. And so that is possibly a picture. And very briefly, Herefordshire, very interesting tussle there where the Conservatives are under pressure. Well, that is the picture here in the West Midlands. Let's now go over to the east where we join Andrew Sinclair in Great Yarmouth.
Patrick, thank you. The politics of the East have always been dominated by the Conservatives, and after all the counting is done at the end of today, the Conservatives will still run the majority of councils in this part of the country, but the Conservatives are taking quite a hitting at the moment. Overnight, they lost control of Peterborough, Basildon, Southend. They failed to take their target seat of Colchester. The big story of the night, as far as we're concerned over here, has been the success of the Liberal Democrats. Two very big scalps for them overnight. First of all, they took North Norfolk. They doubled the number of seats they had in North Norfolk District Council. They're now running that. But the very big one last night was Chelmsford. Until yesterday, they only had 5 seats on the council. Today they have 31 and they are now running the council, and in the next few minutes Vince Cable, the Liberal Democrat leader, will be going to Chelmsford to congratulate his troops. On top of that, the Lib Dems last night picked up seats all over the region. Gains in Southend helped them to take the council into no overall control, to take it away from the Conservatives. Also worth noting, we've had 33 independent councillors elected so far and 8 Greens, so it does seem that if the voters are wanting to take it out on the main Westminster parties over their handling of Brexit, they do seem to be voting more for the smaller parties or for the independents. Just a quick word about Labour. Labour have held on to the councils which they already control, places like Harlow, Cambridge, and we expect they'll hold on to Norwich this afternoon. They held on to Ipswich last night. But what's interesting is Labour are making very few gains in any other part of the region. And if we're getting close to a general election, as many people think we are, Labour really should be doing better than they're doing at the moment. Well, that's the position here in the east of England. Now we'll hand over to John for the picture in Brighton.
Thanks very much, Andrew. Well, wide open here. I think it's fair to say that national political leaders will be watching Brighton and Hove quite carefully at 5 p.m. late results today. Why is that? Because leadership here has bounced around over the past decade or so. In 2007, the Conservatives led. In 2011, it was the Greens. In 2015, it became Labour, but only just, very tight indeed. Add to that the national controversies. An anti-Semitic row here. One Labour councillor resigned, went to the Conservatives, claimed she was bullied. There have been other accusations denied, of course, by Momentum that party members bullied Labour councillors here. Labour's problems there. Brexit a problem for the Conservatives. All this leading to, yes, we've heard it before, haven't we, from West Midlands and East Anglia, an expectation that the smaller parties may do very well, the Liberal Democrats and the Greens. This, in the south of England, is an area where they have done well in the past. Liberal Democrat MP in Eastbourne up the road has been a Liberal Democrat MP in Lewis, and the MP for here, Brighton Pavilion, is Caroline Lucas, the only Green MP in Westminster. So, some expectation that Labour and Tories will do badly today. The smaller parties will do well. We'll find out around 5 o'clock.
OK, thanks to Patrick, Andrew and John there for those updates. I think we're able to see the Lib Dem leader, Vince Cable, now, who's on a walkabout in Chelmsford. And the Liberal Democrats, as you can see on your screens right now, up 304 councillors as things stand. And there they are waiting, those council workers waiting to greet Sir Vince Cable. He's been tweeting in the last short while. I'm just going to pull that tweet up for you to remind you of what he was saying. But he's talking about the Lib Dems being back in force as the third party in British politics. Three-party politics is back, he's been saying. He says, in big cities and rural England, in both Leave and Remain areas, we have shown ourselves the strongest campaigning force and the big winners of the night. Three-party politics is back, declares Vince Cable. Of course, we're waiting to see the rest of the results coming in through the day, but perhaps an even bigger test for the Liberal Democrats will come in the European elections, when, of course, they will be up against the Remain supporting Change UK, that new party fighting for the same voters, essentially. But for the moment, much to celebrate for the Liberal Democrats as a result of these local elections. Well, we'll have much more on the results in the next hour. They're constantly updating, of course, many more still to come in. We will keep you right up to date, though. Let's take a look at the weather forecast now with Simon King.
Thank you, Anita. Well, we've got the bank holiday weekend coming up, and if you've got any plans for the outside, you might want to take note because it's going to turn much colder over the next few days. Now, at the moment, we've got quite a bit of cloud. That's the scene at the moment in Gloucestershire. Some outbreaks of showery rain affecting northern parts of England. It's going to drift its way further south and eastward. Heavy showers in the far southeast of England. Some brighter skies in the southwest and some brighter skies, bit of sunshine in Scotland. But here we've got some snow showers moving in because we've got a northerly wind, and with that northerly wind bringing the chillier weather, so temperatures 7 to 10 degrees Celsius for northern parts, whereas in the far south you're still just holding on to the milder conditions. But through tonight, this band of cloud and showery rain will continue to spread its way south and eastward. Still further wintry showers into the far northeast of Scotland and North York Moors. But look at the blues here on the map. We're expecting some frost across the northern half of the UK. Further south, perhaps not quite as cold. Temperatures about 5 or 6 degrees Celsius. These are the temperatures in towns and cities. In the countryside, it'll be lower than that, so you may wake up early on Saturday morning to a bit of frost. But just like this picture, with some blue skies, there will be some sunshine across many parts of the UK. So into the start of the weekend, you can see we've got this northerly wind bringing that cold air from the Arctic and from Iceland. All of us feeling the chill on Saturday. A bright, sunny start for many. It'll be dry for most of us as well, but there will be some showers affecting the eastern parts of England, the far northeast of Scotland, and temperatures by the afternoon 8 to 12 or 13 degrees, perhaps 14 Celsius in the West Country. Into Sunday, high pressure is dominating things, and that's mainly towards the west. That's what's allowing this northerly wind, but it's also bringing us the settled feel. So it's going to be another bright start on Sunday, but again, a chilly one with some patchy frost. More cloud developing as the day goes on, but another dry one really for many of us. Just a few showers in the far north. Temperatures, well, 10 to 13 degrees. These are way below the average for the time of year. And then going into bank holiday Monday, there could be a few showers with some cloud, but otherwise there'll be some brighter, some sunnier spells. Temperatures, though, on Monday will be very similar. They'll be well below the average, about 9 to 13 degrees Celsius. A big contrast to last year's early May bank holiday, where we got to 28.7 degrees. Bye-bye.
A BBC News election special with me, Joanna Gosling, as we bring you the results of local elections which have been taking place in England and Northern Ireland. It's bad news for both the Conservatives and Labour as voters turn away from the two main parties.
Sadly, the big parties are being punished for what's happening over Brexit, and they're forgetting the local issues.
The message we are getting loud and clear is all about Brexit, and the residents are telling us they're going to make sure there's some change because of their dissatisfaction over Brexit.
It's been a good night for the Lib Dems, the Greens and independent candidates. The Lib Dems have made significant gains in results announced so far.
I'm Annita McVeigh live at Westminster. There may have been local elections, but national politics seems to have been a deciding factor for voters, with both Conservatives and Labour hit by an apparent Brexit backlash. Labour leader Jeremy Corbyn cheered a win in Trafford, a former Conservative stronghold, but blamed other losses on government austerity measures.
I'm very sorry we lost them. We'll fight back and we'll win them back. That's the whole point behind it. What we are doing here is putting forward an agenda of anti-austerity and also pointing out that local authorities have borne the brunt of the austerity agenda which has been foisted on them by the Conservatives and the Lib Dems when they were in coalition together.
We'll bring you all the results, including full analysis of why the Tories and Labour suffered those losses and what's behind the gains for the Lib Dems as the counts continue. Good morning. Welcome back to our BBC News special on the results coming in from yesterday's local elections. Voters have punished the Conservatives and Labour in early results in England in what appears to be a protest against the deadlock over Brexit at Westminster. Overnight, it quickly became clear that the smaller parties, such as the Liberal Democrats and the Greens, and independent candidates were winning seats around the country. 113 of the 248 councils up for election have declared their results so far. Counting in the remaining authorities, as well as in Northern Ireland, takes place later, and we will, of course, continue to bring you results as they come in. Let's take a look at the results so far, and in terms of the number of councillors, the Conservatives are down 446 seats. They've lost about a quarter of the seats they were defending so far. Labour have lost 76 seats, and they have lost about 8% of the seats that they were defending. They were defending a relatively poor result. The Liberal Democrats are the big winners, as you can see, up 304 councillors. They've increased so far the number of seats that they hold by 150%. They're talking about a revival of three-party politics in the country. The Greens have increased their share of the vote, and the Independents also amongst the night's winners. UKIP are down. Let's take a look at what it means for individual councils and the number of councils controlled by each of the parties or by no party, no overall party. Labour have lost 2 councils. The Conservatives have lost 16. Liberal Democrats have won 8, and there is an extra 8 hung councils as a result of what's come in so far. And some of the totemic results show Labour losing in previous strongholds, including Hartlepool and Bolsover, and the Conservatives losing some of their previous strongholds as well. We'll take a closer look at the individual stories, but right now let's hear from Vince Cable. He's with Carol Walker. Let's go to you. Hi, Carol.
Yeah, hello there. Well, the result here in Chelmsford was one of the biggest upsets of the night. The Lib Dems took 26 extra seats to win control of this council. And this is in a city which voted leave in the EU referendum. And I'm here with Vince Cable, the Lib Dem leader. Thanks very much indeed for joining us. What do you think led to the result here?
Well, it's spectacularly good, but it's not just Chelmsford. We've done massively well across the country. I mean, the Lib Dems are the big success story of the night. And it's a combination of things. People are very dissatisfied with the Conservative government, the Labour Party all over the place on the big issue of the day. But actually, it's good local campaigning, real commitment to local government, and a very, very, very good team, and a recovery of morale from the difficult days several years ago.
How big a factor was the Brexit deadlock?
Well, I think it has led to a situation where people are very fed up with the complete deadlock in government. Nothing being done about the future of the health service and social care, underfunded schools, knife crime, homelessness. These are all being neglected. We've got to deal with it. We're very clear about the way forward. I mean, we want to stop Brexit, and we want a people's vote so that ultimately the people decide which way we go on the matter.
But in places like Chelmsford, they actually voted for leaving the European Union in the referendum. Are you surprised? Do you think there's been a change of the public mood?
Well, I think we've done well across the country, and we did very well, for example, in the West Country, in Somerset and Devon, which were heavily Leave. We've done well in parts of the north of England. A lot of the parliamentary seats that we lost in 2015 in Leave areas are now look as if they're going to come back to us. No, I think it was just a very, very good story for the Liberal Democrats. We've been clear and honest about what we believe. We're well organised. We've been building up our infrastructure, and we've got these wonderful campaigners here who've put in an enormous amount of effort.
Isn't this just a one-off protest vote? Are you really going to be able to replicate this, for example, when we come to the EU elections in a couple of weeks' time, when there'll be other parties likely to splinter your vote?
Well, I think the splintering of the vote is a problem, which is why I urged that we should all get together under the same banner, but that hasn't happened, and I regret it, but we are where we are. And I think what people will do, they only have one vote. so they will get behind the strongest of the Remain parties, and as we've seen from the evidence of tonight, we are very, very clearly the strongest of the Remain parties, and we expect that people will get behind us.
Local results, though, don't necessarily translate into national success, do they?
They don't necessarily, but they have in the past. Wherever we've done well locally, this has then been converted into parliamentary seats. We see this happening tonight. Many of the areas we hope to win in any future general election are places that have gone over to us. North and south, urban, rural. No, it's a very, very good story, and I treat it as an absolutely brilliant success.
Isn't this, though, really just a result of a collapse in the Tory vote rather than a positive vote for your party?
Well, this is a positive vote for our party. I'm not going to be deflected by negative interpretation. Clearly there is a lot of frustration with the Conservative government. They're doing absolutely nothing and they're making a complete mess of Brexit. They're also dissatisfied with the Labour Party. Jeremy Corbyn's been sitting on the fence for a couple of years on the Brexit issue. All of these factors have played in. But where we have fought very strong campaigns, where we have good local council initiatives, we've also done well there. And it bodes very well for the party. I mean, people have been writing us off in the past, and I think we've demonstrated today we are very much now part of three-party politics.
You've said you're going to stand down as your party's leader. You're not going to change your mind as a result of tonight's victories?
No, I've always said I wanted to ensure an orderly succession to the next generation. I haven't changed my views about that, but today is about celebrating a great victory in Essex.
Vince Cable, thanks very much indeed for joining us. And of course, the vote of Essex man and Essex woman has always been seen as a very important barometer of wider public opinion. You had a very happy Vince Cable there. But there's absolutely no doubt that the Lib Dems have benefited from the public anger at the Brexit deadlock, which has resulted in big losses for both the Conservatives and the Labour Party here and in other parts of the country. Joanna.
Thank you very much, Carol. Well, just to give you a bit of the context, actually, the Conservative Home website is saying, Harry Phibbs on that is saying, the last time the Lib Dems made net gains of over 100 seats was in 2004, and then it was only 137, and the last time they made gains of over 300 seats was in 1995. There had been a risk, he says, that the party could fizzle out, but they did have a very good night. The success story of the night. Well, let's take a closer look as well at the fallout of those results with our political correspondent, Chris Mason.
Serve as member for Results have trundled in throughout the night. There have been smiles and cheers, a hold in the battleground of Swindon for the Conservatives, and again in northeast Lincolnshire, but elsewhere not good news for them. The Tories losing control in places like St Albans, Southend, Broxtowe and Peterborough. We can hazard a guess how this couple voted, but what do the results mean for the Prime Minister?
I think she needs to take a look at how many councillors we've lost overnight, wake up in the morning and think about how she thinks the Conservative Party needs to put its best foot forward.
These ballot boxes brought good news for Labour, where they took control of Trafford in Greater Manchester, but the party lost control of councils in Hartlepool and Bolsover. A sense in some areas that it wasn't the night they'd hoped for.
It's not looking good. This is going to be a very difficult night for Labour. We've been out and about across the borough, and the message we are getting loud and clear is all about Brexit, and the residents are telling us they're going to make sure there's some change because of their dissatisfaction over Brexit.
We have won Trafford to an overall majority. We have swings to Labour in a number of boroughs across the whole councils across the whole of the country, and that gives us a basis on which we can win marginal seats such as Swindon, such as Thurrock and other places, and I'm looking forward to an election that we do that.
So far it's been good news for the smaller parties like the Liberal Democrats and the Greens, as well as local independents who are on the advance. The Lib Dems have gained areas like North Norfolk, Winchester and the Cotswolds.
Actually feeling pretty buoyant. We're seeing a lot of our vote coming out, and the national picture, of course, is really tough for the Tories.
So, smiling Lib Dems and smiling Greens as well.
We've had a very, very good night so far. We've
gained a lot of new seats and, importantly, on a lot of new councils where people have never elected Greens before, and these are right across the country in places you wouldn't expect.
However, there's a long way to go yet. This is a big set of local elections, and the parties are watching closely, peering into what it might mean for their wider fortunes. Here, at daft o'clock in the morning, is this some cross-party collaboration? Or perhaps commiseration? Chris Mason, BBC News.
Well, we are, of course, keeping a close eye on what's happening in the councils that have yet to declare their results. 114 councils have declared, 134 still to go. One of the things to look for as well, of course, is turnout. And just looking at some of the figures that are coming through just now, just hearing from our correspondent in Nottingham saying that the Mansfield mayoral election counting has begun and the turnout there is nearly half what it was in 2015, 29.76%. This time it was 57.9% last time. They're starting their counting in Tunbridge Wells and in Redditch. There's an update on the turnout. The overall turnout figure is 31%. So counting underway, we're looking at the turnout. The headline, analysts are saying, is a plague on both your houses, to both Labour and the Conservatives after the results that they've had so far. It's mainly rural constituencies that are going to be counted throughout the day still ahead, and analysts are saying that that is going to likely not favour the Conservatives. So we've got about half the picture so far, and we've got the full picture to unfold over the course of the day. Let's go to Annita McVeigh. She's in Westminster with more reaction. Annita.
Joanna, thank you. Yes, it's going to be really interesting over the course of the day to work out exactly what the narrative is coming from this local election, or the narratives. You've got the Conservatives and Labour blaming handling of Brexit in large part for their losses, yet you're also seeing significant gains for Remain supporting parties like the Greens, like the Liberal Democrats. The Independents doing really well also. We haven't got a full read, of course, on what the political leanings of those independent candidates are with regards to Brexit. But, you know, certainly significant gains for Remain supporting parties too. Let's get the very latest thoughts on all of this with our assistant political editor, Norman Smith, who's keeping across all these developments as they come in. Norman, what's your take on that point I was just discussing? You know, what are the big narratives going to be from this in terms of dissatisfaction with the handling of Brexit or support for the Remain position?
Well, I mean, I think the big story is quite obviously the Brexit backlash from voters who are frankly fed up with the two main parties. They want Brexit sorted. What we don't have, and I think is the second big narrative, is what on earth do the two main parties do? And it seems to me both of them have sort of staggered so far into the Brexit quagmire. Neither of them can really see a way out. If you look at the Tory side, they're on course for a shatteringly bad night. I wouldn't be surprised if they did lose 1,000 seats. But you've got some Tories who will conclude from this, well, OK, the way we get this sorted is we do a deal with Labour and we move on. Then you have other Tories who are saying if Theresa May does that, it's a Ramsay MacDonald moment, she will not be forgiven. And already we're hearing from Brexiteers saying she's the problem, she's got to go. So Theresa May finds herself hemmed in. Jeremy Corbyn, likewise, in his heartland traditional northern seats, has lost in places he should never be losing. Hartlepool, Barnsley, Bolsover, for heaven's sake, Bolsover, they lost control of. And so Leave supporting Labour MPs are saying, right, well, it's pretty obvious you've got to do a deal with Theresa May. You've got to put Brexit to bed, and the way to do it is to do a deal. And I think actually some of Team Corbyn agree with that. The trouble is, half his party, probably more than half his party, are passionately pro-Remain. And were he to do that, you invite civil war. And they are seizing on the point which you were alluding to, Anita, that there has been a swing up in the number of people voting for Remain parties, the Lib Dems and Greens. They conclude, actually, the tide's moving our way. Now is the time to push for another referendum. So both the main parties are being beaten about the head, and I suspect are going to keep getting beaten about the head, particularly in the European elections in a fortnight's time, because neither of them have a clue what to do, albeit this morning Jeremy Corbyn trying to play down last night's results.
I'm very sorry we lost them. We'll fight back and we'll win them back. That's the whole point behind it. What we are doing here is putting forward an agenda of anti-austerity and also pointing out that local authorities have borne the brunt of the austerity agenda which has been foisted on them by the Conservatives and the Lib Dems when they were in coalition together.
And off the back of that, perhaps you should have done better. Andrew Gwynn, your own Shadow Secretary of State for Local Government, said that Labour expected and hoped to do better. Do you accept that?
Of course we wanted to do better. Of course we did. We always want to do better. That's why we're in politics for. That's what we exist for. We are going to campaign and continue to campaign to try and keep and bring people together in negotiations of Brexit, but also to oppose austerity and put forward an agenda which actually deals with the injustices that exist in this country in housing and so many other areas.
Bolton, Bolsover, Hartlepool, why do you think we lost in these council areas?
A number of reasons. Some of them were local factors, and some of them were people probably disagreeing with both parties on attitudes towards the European Union. Our policy is that we're the only party that seeks to appeal to people however they voted in 2016 and to ensure that we try to defend jobs and working conditions in this country. That's actually quite an important agenda.
Jeremy Corbyn there in Sale earlier celebrating Labour's gain in the Trafford council election. Norman, so over the coming days and weeks, it's going to be fascinating to see where exactly, where Labour and the Conservatives have made losses, where their vote has gone, and how that has an impact on the European elections that you were mentioning just a while ago. Because if we look at the idea of a protest vote, UKIP fielding much fewer candidates in these local elections, so not an obvious place for that protest vote to go there. But in the European elections, we would have the Brexit Party, and of course we would have Change UK supporting Remain.
I mean, all the narratives that we've been talking about in this election, because of it being in effect a Brexit election, the European election is going to be a Brexit election on stilts, because into the fray enters Nigel Farage with his Brexit Party. So if you're angry about Brexit, you don't have to think much. You just look down on the ballot paper and see Brexit. You're probably just going to tick it. So he will probably do pretty well. Likewise, at the other end of the spectrum, we have Change UK entering the fray, set up in despair, bluntly, at Jeremy Corbyn's refusal to bite on a referendum. They're likely to hoover up a lot of the Remain votes. So the division and the polarity in British politics is going to be accentuated even more. And what is going to be interesting is to see whether the Lib Dems can cling on to the sort of upsurge they have, because they will now have Change UK piling in, looking for exactly the same sort of votes. And in a way, although the Lib Dems have done well, don't take it away from them, they had to do well, because if they couldn't do well today, they're never going to do well. They've got the main parties out flat cold. They did disastrously the last time these elections were fought. They had to do well today. And I did wonder whether this might actually be Vince Cable's swan song, because it does provide him with a moment, maybe not today, but in the next few days, in which he can say, look, I brought the party back, now I'm going to hand over. And I wonder actually if he will quite soon decide he is going to step aside and let someone else come in.
OK, Norman, as always, thank you for your thoughts. Norman Smith. Well, when it comes to the results for the Conservatives, as we've been discussing, the explanation for some of the losses that the Conservatives have had overnight has been put down to a Brexit backlash, that the party hasn't delivered on Brexit, its handling of the Brexit process. Some Conservative voices are saying that really lies at the feet of Prime Minister Theresa May, her handling of all of this. The Conservative MP, Priti Patel, is one of those who's been reacting to the overnight results, and she said she thought the time had come for a change in the party leadership.
Do you think Theresa May needs to go?
Well, I think that is absolutely now the ultimate question, and I will reflect and play back many of the comments that I've had on the doorstep over certainly the last 3 weeks while I've been knocking on doors. People have very categorically said that, she is part of the problem. So I think, where we've got to now look at these results, look at our direction of travel going forward as a party. I think obviously our party leadership and our party nationally needs to look at the situation and make some very, very serious decisions now in terms of where we go.
Where would you like to see it go?
Well, I think we need change. I mean, I just don't think we can continue like this. I've been very clear, quite frankly. Many of my constituents have said this to me, we need change. We need a change of leadership. Perhaps the time has now come for that.
And joining me now is Paul Scully, who's the Conservative Vice Chair for London. Paul, welcome to you. And just picking up on what Priti Patel was saying, do you think, bearing in mind the results so far for the Conservatives, the losses heading towards 500 seats as we stand, that it is time for a change of leadership, that this is a verdict on Theresa May's handling of the process so far on Brexit?
I think what it is actually, it's a verdict on Brexit as a whole and the Parliament as a whole. It's sort of almost popular in all your houses, and so my view is we've just got to get this done. That's what people want. If you look at what the Labour leader of Sunderland Council said, if you look at the Labour leader of Pontefract, what Jess Phillips said when she was saying that Labour's Brexit plan isn't working, what people want is actually just to get on with it. If we actually do start looking at leadership issues, we've got a 6-week window when the Conservative Party will just be speaking to itself, just as the country wants it to speak to the country and get Brexit done.
Well, you say get it done. Does that involve a deal with Labour, do you think?
Well, talk's going to continue, and that's the right thing to do because, we're at an impasse at the moment, and if we can find something to get this across the line, then all well and good. So much of the discussion, though, is about customs union and these sort of things, and that's actually for the second half of the debate about Brexit, about how we leave, not whether we leave, and it's just getting that first thing over the line, the whether we leave, that's important.
How do you explain then, in what would have been seen as Conservative strongholds, for example, North East Somerset, the Westminster constituency seat of Jacob Rees-Mogg, who everyone knows absolutely supports Brexit. How do you explain a council like that going over to Liberal Democrat control, a Remain supporting party?
Yeah, well, I've beat a Lib Dem in Sutton in 2015. We've got a Lib Dem council, yet people voted to leave. Actually, what's happened in those cases is professional people that are protesting, effectively, protesting about the status quo, about the establishment and the sense of disenfranchisement rather than the specifics, I think.
Why are they protesting with a Remain party then, rather than, say, just not voting?
Well, I think there's a good amount of people that have done that, and that would obviously have brought the Conservative vote down and allowed the Lib Dems, who do work hard, they campaign a lot, to come to the fore. Not necessarily a direct positive vote against, over to the Lib Dems. But nonetheless, the Lib Dems can be seen in certain areas, because they're saying different things in different parts of the country, as a protest vote in general.
You say the Lib Dems do well in terms of canvassing and working hard on the ground. Presumably, your councillors have been doing that as well. Your teams have been doing that as well in the Conservative Party. But is the message you're getting that they just haven't been able to get their local message across over the noise, if you like, created by Brexit?
Yeah, I mean, the real regret of the 500-odd Conservative councillors that have lost, there would have been really hard-working local residents trying to do their best for the area. And those efforts that lots of them would have done over a number of years are being lost because of the noise here, where there's too many members of Parliament, too many of my colleagues that are just interested in theory, in it rather than pragmatism and what's best for the country.
OK, Paul Scully, a Conservative Vice Chair for London, thanks for joining me here at Westminster today. Well, I don't think there's anyone out there who would believe that the noise is going to stop as a result of these elections. If anything, we're still seeing those votes coming in so far as very much reflecting not only a split amongst politicians, but a split in the country as to what the next steps should be on Brexit. Brexit clearly the dominant issue in these so-called local elections. Back now to you, Joanna, in the studio.
Thank you very much, Anita. We're keeping an eye, of course, on all the counts, because there are still a lot of counts still underway. 114 councils declared, 134 to go. Let's pick through what we can make so far in terms of those results with the polling analyst, Professor John Curtis. A plague on both your houses is the phrase that keeps being used for Labour and the Tories.
Well, I mean, there are a number of reasons why this is the case. The first is if we compare these results, not with the position in 2015 when these seats were last up for grabs, but compare the position with last year. Well, Brexit was in the middle of its process, but before the deal had been unveiled. Both parties' votes are down by between 6 and 7 points as compared with 12 months ago. So they've both lost ground during the course of the Brexit impasse. Second, where have they been losing votes above all? Well, yes, in part, it's amongst places where the Leave vote was relatively high in 2016. And the Conservatives in particular seem to have lost some, though not all, of the movement in their direction that had occurred in Leave areas since 2016. But certainly, therefore, clear disgruntlement about Leave voters. But it's not confined to them, because the other clear pattern is that voters seem to have taken out their disgruntlement on whichever party it tends to be strongest locally. So the Conservatives have been losing ground most heavily in the south of England, Labour ground most heavily in the north of England, Trafford being the one exception. And also, of course, we've seen this remarkable success of independents, near trebling of their representation so far, often getting around a quarter or so of the vote on average. And therefore a sense in which voters are, where they've got the opportunity, there's a credible local challenge to the whole of the party system, they seem to have been rather remarkably willing to take it.
The winners, the Liberal Democrats, the party of Remain.
To a degree, yes, and of course that's one of the paradoxes. Just to go, this isn't simple, in that although it seems to be the Leave voters, or at least certainly voters in Leave areas, they've been more likely to depart from Conservative and Labour, it's the Liberal Democrats, the party of the Remain, together with the Greens, who've been making the most gains. But it's very difficult, once you look at the detail of the results, to find any pattern whereby the Liberal Democrats are doing better in Remain areas than in Leave areas. So probably the Liberal Democrat performance has more to do with the at least partial resurrection of their traditional role as the party of protest. Whenever traditionally voters have been happy, particularly when voters have been happy with the government, they use the Liberal Democrats as a way of expressing it. And certainly what's interesting, the other thing that's going on, where the Liberal Democrats have been going up most are places where they were second in 2015 or in 2018, often in places where they were bastions of local strength until the party collapsed in 2015. Some of that seems to come back, but I mean, these bastions of Liberal Democrat strength are often in Leave areas rather than Remain areas. So the other thing is going on is just simply the Democrats winning back some of those voters who used to vote for it, were really unhappy in 2015 and 2017, but perhaps are finally beginning to come back to the party in those places where the party has always had a degree of local strength and credibility. So it may be much more to do with Liberal Democrat protest pavement politics than the high politics of Brexit and their support for the Remain referendum.
We like to try and glean stuff, but in terms of what it indicates for the future, it's always really hard to know, isn't it, John? I mean, just one very quick question. Vince Cable says it's the return of three-party politics. Do you think he's right on that? I
think the answer is yes. I think it's fair to say that this is the return of at least three-party politics. But I suspect that on the 23rd of May, we will discover that there are more than three significant players, and we may see the most fragmented British election since the advent of mass British democracy.
Thank you very much, John. And of course, that is because in the European elections, we will see the Brexit Party led by Nigel Farage and Change UK. And they are at the opposite ends of the spectrum in terms of the politics of Brexit. They've not stood in these elections, so it's a constantly changing picture. As it is today, we've got around half the results in, and we are, of course, going to keep bringing you the results as they come throughout the day. But the headlines are a very bad night for the Conservative Party and Labour, and a good night for the Liberal Democrats. We will continue to keep you updated, but for now, let's just take a quick break and catch up with the weather with Simon King.
Thanks, Joanna. The headline in the weather is that it's getting colder. We're going to see the temperatures well below the average over the next few days, just in time for a bank holiday weekend. Now, at the moment, it's quite cloudy out there. We've got some outbreaks of rain across central areas, and it's all linked into a cold front, which is moving its way southward. And you can see this showery rain as it pushes its way further south and eastward. Behind it, it's still quite cloudy, still a few showers and snow showers in the far northeast of Scotland. A drop in those temperatures, 7 to 10 degrees Celsius in northern parts to the southwest, where you've got some sunshine. We'll see temperatures about 14 or 15 degrees. Now, through tonight, we'll continue with some showers in the northeast of Scotland. Again, quite wintry here. Elsewhere, showers generally clearing away. But as you can see from the map here, there's going to be a frost tonight across those northern parts. Temperatures not quite as low across the far south. But it means that actually for Saturday, it'll start off largely sunny. A bit of cloud developing into the afternoon. Temperatures about 11, 14 degrees Celsius. And the chilly weather will continue throughout the weekend. Bye-bye.
India is going to the polls with nearly 900 million voters expected to turn up at the ballots for the world's largest democratic exercise. So what can we expect from this election?
We'll be travelling to every corner of this vast country, speaking to voters. Chat about everything from business to lifestyle. And look at how recent challenges may affect the results.
For full coverage of the 2019 India elections, join us online and here at BBC News.
We're not just here to show you these amazing places,
but to inspire you.
To leave your comfort zone behind.
I know they said I'm not going to feel the cold. I just want to get in now. To experience different cultures, secret histories, tantalizing food, delicious, breathtaking landscapes,
and hidden gems.
So come and join us. It's time to plan your next adventure. Teams arrived. I guess off we go.
The Travel Show tomorrow at 10:30. Weekends are different on the BBC News Channel.
Welcome back to our BBC News special on the results coming in from yesterday's local elections. There have been big losses for the Conservatives, losses also for Labour, and the smaller parties have gained in what looks like a protest over the Brexit deadlock at Westminster. Overnight, it quickly became clear that parties like the Liberal Democrats and the Greens and independent candidates were winning seats around the country. The Liberal Democrat leader Vince Cable has said it's clear his party is the most dominant force for Remain in British politics. 115 of the 248 councils up for election have so far declared their results, and counting in the remaining authorities, as well as in Northern Ireland, is continuing throughout the day, and we will of course bring you results as they come through. Well, the headline figures so far: the Conservatives have lost 453 seats so far. The Liberal Democrats have gained more than 300 councillors across the country and have taken control of several councils, largely at the expense of the Tories. Labour have lost 75 councillors. So let's just bring you right up to date with the latest results that we've had through. West Oxfordshire is the latest council to declare, and it's a Conservative hold. 32 Conservative seats there, 8 Liberal Democrat seats and 5 Labour seats, 4 others. And the other results that have come through since we've been on air this morning: Amber Valley, that is a Labour gain from the Conservatives, Labour taking 25 seats there, and the Conservatives Conservatives, no, that result is wrong, so I'm not going to tell you that result. I'm looking at results coming through on a live page, but they seem to not be tallying with the headline there. So just the overview then is that the Conservative Party have so far got control of 37 councils and Labour 40 councils. We will return to the election results shortly, but first let's take a look at the rest of the day's news. More than 1 million people along India's northeast coast are sheltering in relief centres as the area is battered by the worst summer cyclone there for more than 40 years. Trees have been uprooted and electricity poles felled. Winds of up to 200 kilometres an hour have been forecast, as well as a possible storm surge. Ramzan Kamali has the latest.
Cyclone Fani hits land, battering India's east coast. This is the town of Puri, home of the Jagannath Temple. It's been standing here for over 850 years. Officials may have been braced as Fani headed up the Bay of Bengal, but with winds expected to reach speeds of 220 kilometres an hour and 100 million people in its path, precautions were taken. Many in the most exposed areas sought safety. Around 1 million have been evacuated from low-lying regions. Hundreds of emergency shelters have been set up and schools and universities closed.
Now we are first trying to evacuate the pregnant women and the lactating mothers, and particularly the old people and people in thatched houses, because they are more prone to danger. So we are just trying to lessen the human casualties.
Forecasters tracked Fani's progress as the eye of the cyclone approached Odisha State.
This storm system has a number of hazards attached to it. We've got torrential rain, 200 or 300 millimetres of rain on this, and
Ahead of the storm, we'll get a storm surge working in across parts of Odisha, West Bengal and even into parts of Bangladesh, and that poses the threat of some significant flooding as well.
Officials have been using these forecasts to help them plan emergency operations. Thousands of relief workers have been deployed, and the government has set up a relief and rescue fund worth over $150 million in anticipation. But those officials are also warning that many homes and infrastructure caught in Cyclone Fani's path are likely to be completely destroyed. Ramzan Karmali, BBC News.
Rahul Tandon is in Bhubaneswar, the capital of Odisha, which is right in the path of the storm.
This is the fury of nature in one of India's poorest states. The cyclone hit this area at around 8 a.m. local time, and over the last hour we've seen the wind speeds increase dramatically. In Puri, where the cyclone came in, speeds are up to 210 kilometers an hour. On Thursday, one of the largest evacuations that this area has ever seen took place. The authorities used tractors, boats, cars, any form of transport they could find to get people into safety, into those temporary shelters. The first part of that work has been done, but when this cyclone passes by, many people will have seen their lives destroyed. Their land will have been destroyed by the cyclone, and the boats they go fishing on will also be devastated. The work that this cyclone will leave behind will start when it passes from this area in a few hours' time.
A second man has been charged with the murder of 14-year-old Jaden Moody, who was knocked off a moped and stabbed in East London. Jaden from Waltham Forest was found injured in Leighton following reports of a road crash. 21-year-old Yusuf Dubbard from East London is expected to appear at Thames Magistrates Court later today. 18-year-old Ayub Majdaleen from the Wembley area has already been charged. The case is due to be sent to the Old Bailey on Tuesday. New research has found that people receiving effective treatment for HIV cannot pass on the virus to their sexual partners. A study published in the Lancet Medical Journal looked at nearly 1,000 gay male couples and discovered no cases of HIV transmission over 8 years. The researchers say it's a powerful message which everyone should be aware of. 1 and 2 pence coins are to remain in circulation after the Treasury confirmed it had gone back on plans to get rid of them. The Chancellor, Philip Hammond, said even though technology had transformed banking, it was important to give people a choice and help those who rely entirely on cash, particularly the elderly, vulnerable and those living in rural areas. A BBC investigation has found that an increasing number of councils across the UK have decided to ban, phase out or limit the use of a controversial weed killer called glyphosate. One manufacturer, Monsanto, faces more than 11,000 lawsuits in the United States over claims its use contributed to cancer. The company denies the allegations and says its products have been used safely in more than 160 countries around the world. Jane McGubbin reports.
This is the product which is under the spotlight around the world.
So, Stuart, glyphosate. Glyphosate. You just refuse to use it now?
I do, yes. I feel it's unsafe.
Stuart has been a groundsman in Inverclyde for 30 years. And for those 30 years, every spring and summer until now, he handled glyphosate weed killer virtually every day.
It was the news reports from America that first put this on your radar?
It was, yes, and it got me concerned.
There's about 800 academic studies that says you're wrong. There isn't a risk.
But there are also studies out there saying that there is a risk. They used to say smoking was safe. They used to say asbestos was safe. That's not safe, Annie. We all know it's not safe.
This is the level of mistrust manufacturers Monsanto face along with owners Bayer. Company accounts show today in the States they are facing over 11,000 lawsuits. So what about the science? Monsanto told us there's no evidence councils which choose to move away from glyphosate are enhancing safety, with more than 800 studies agreeing it's safe when used as directed. But this paper by the World Health Organization concluded it was probably carcinogenic to humans.
The study, which is quoted very widely, was a hazard assessment, so potentially everything's a hazard. Glyphosate was in the same category as hot drinks and red meat. It's how you use them.
Monsanto say the critics are wrong. They remain confident in the science and regulatory record of their products. Confidence not shared by all. Jane McCubbin, BBC News.
In Thailand, preparations are underway for the coronation of King Maha Vajiralongkorn. It starts this weekend with a lavish 3-day ceremony. This morning in Bangkok, the day began with a procession which brought the king's name plaque, horoscope and royal emblem from the Temple of the Emerald Buddha to the royal palace. As the day continues, there'll be further elaborate ceremonies. The actor Peter Mayhew, who played Chewbacca in the Star Wars films, has died at the age of 74. The 7'2" actor played the Wookiee warrior in the original Star Wars trilogy in the late 1970s and early 80s, as well as some later films. Paying tribute, Harrison Ford, who played Chewbacca's companion Han Solo, described Peter as a kind and gentle man, possessed of great dignity and noble character. OK, let's go back to the local elections in England. We've heard from 2 party leaders so far this morning, Sir Vince Cable and Jeremy Corbyn. Sir Vince said the Liberal Democrats are now a dominant force to stop Brexit, while the Labour leader has played down suggestions that his party had a bad night. Well, Labour has taken full control of the former Tory flagship council of Trafford, gaining 6 seats. The Tories lost 9 councillors, with the Liberal Democrats adding 2 seats and the Greens 1. It is the first time Labour has taken control of Trafford since 2003. Labour gained Ashton-upon-Mersey, which has always voted Conservative. The Greens took a seat from the Tories in Altrincham. Our political editor for the North West, Nina Warhurst, explains.
Well, what a morning it's been in Trafford. Trafford, this borough of Greater Manchester, which for 14 years was a lonely blue island in a sea of red, which switched to no overall control last year, and this year is firmly in the hands of Labour. Let me talk you through some of the losses and gains. So, Labour made 6 gains at the expense of the Conservative Party, and one of them was Ashton-on-Mersey, a ward which has never before not been blue. On top of those 6 losses, there were 2 losses to the Liberal Democrats, partly, possibly, because this is, remember, a borough that voted Remain in the referendum of 2016. But then, interestingly, further south, there was a gain for the Green Party. Now, all of Altrincham, all 3 councillors in that ward belong to the Green Party. We spoke with Graham Brady earlier, the chair of the 1922 committee. Altrincham and Sale West is, of course, his constituency. Was he concerned? Well, he pointed to Westminster. He pointed to the picture over Brexit and said that had been worrying him on the doorstep. But he also said local issued matters, green belts building, and also austerity had come into the mix as well. The Conservatives said they will be getting Trafford back at some point in the future, but they need to think hard now about what the message is to former Conservative heartlands like Trafford.
Well, let's get some more political reaction to the night's results. We can go back to Westminster and join Annita McVeigh. Back to you, Annita.
Thank you, Joanna. Yes, I've got with me here the Deputy Leader of the Liberal Democrats, Jo Swinson. Very good to have you with us. And what's the latest figure you have on Lib Dem gains? Because the party is obviously doing very well in these local elections.
Well, so far we're up 302 councillors. We've obviously gained, I think, 9 councils to be in control of. So, you know, this is an amazing result. We are absolutely delighted to see so much success for hard-working Lib Dem councillors and campaigners up and down the country who deserve, I think, this result because of the work that they've been doing in their communities.
How do the figures so far then sit with the targets that you had?
Oh, I mean, this is beyond what we had hoped. I mean, you know, obviously it's wonderful, and you always want to exceed your expectations. But you know, us making, you know, a triple figure gains would have been a really good night. Last year, for context, we made 75 net gains. So to be at more than 300 when there's still many more results to come in, and having gained 9 councils, last year we gained 4 councils. I mean, look at somewhere like Chelmsford. We went into that campaign, I think, holding 5 councillors, and we now control the council.
How do you explain that? Let's take Chelmsford. This was a Leave voting area. You've done incredibly well there as a Remain supporting party. That's a picture that's been reflected in other areas as well. What's going on with the vote then, do you think?
Well, so this is interesting. So 4/5 of the councils that were up for election last night were in Leave areas, and the Liberal Democrats have done incredibly well. We've done well in Remain areas, yes, like St Albans, for example, where you would expect that to be the case, but we have also done well in Leave areas. And I think part of that is we have a clarity. even in leave areas, there's many people who want to stay in the European Union, and that clarity is respected. But this is about much more than Brexit. I think people look at their television screens with dismay at the wrangling between the government in a shambles and the opposition from Labour not really in a better position. And all the while, people want improvements to their lives. Things are hard out there. And so what you see is Liberal Democrat councils and indeed campaigners who are prioritising those issues and getting things done. And it is that community politics, which we are famous for, which people are also responding to.
So do you feel that people are responding to those local issues rather than your position on Brexit?
Well, I think it's both, and I think in different areas it will be different issues. So I know when I was out campaigning in places like St Albans, very much a Remain area where people are angry about Brexit and they want to support the Liberal Democrats because we want to stop Brexit. But in other areas...
So do you feel it's a protest vote then in some senses?
Well, I think it's people positively saying they want to stay in the European Union and they know that the best way to make that clear at the ballot box is to vote Liberal Democrat, and of course they have the opportunity to do that in 3 weeks' time as well. But there are also places where it's actually about, I was down in Somerset recently, and the Liberal Democrats are regenerating a town of Chard, new leisure centre, affordable housing, making that difference for people's lives when that's in contrast to what the Conservatives are doing. So I think those choices about local communities and the issues that affect people's lives are obviously foremost in many people's minds at local elections.
Some people will say, in many ways, the Liberal Democrats were looking at an open goal with these elections, and you had to do well, and you are doing well. But will the real test come in those European elections when you are fighting for the same votes with Change UK?
Well, first of all, people can't have it both ways. Because those same people used to point to those results that we had to say the Liberal Democrats are dead, they are nowhere, they're not coming back. And do you know what? People have predicted the demise of the Liberal Democrats since before I was even a member of the Liberal Democrats. So, for 20 plus years, people have said that that's it, the Lib Dems have hit their high watermark, or that they're not coming back. We have shown Liberal Democrats are fighting back. We do come back because the liberal values that we hold dear are ones that do resonate, and they do drive our campaigners forward to make the case and to work for the local communities. So we are fighting back, and we are the strongest choice for Remain votes at the European elections. And obviously we will continue to work with others in other parties who share our values in that, because to secure a people's vote and to stop Brexit, we do need to work together.
But there is a danger for you, isn't there, and for other Remain supporting parties, of a fragmentation of the vote, surely?
And look, we've said we think it's a shame that those discussions weren't able to yield a more positive outcome in the time frame available for these European elections, and we are where we are. That is a shame. But we need to go forward with a strong Liberal Democrat message, which is that we are the party that's saying we will stop Brexit, and continue to work with others in Parliament and beyond on securing a people's vote.
How important then is the vote that you have secured in these elections and are securing, as with votes still to come in or results still to come in being a platform for the Lib Dems in the European elections, not only against Brexit supporting candidates, but against Change UK candidates as well?
Well, look, we're focusing on the Liberal Democrat vote, but of course these elections are hugely beneficial to us. It's a springboard. So much in politics is about momentum with a small m, about getting out there and the direction of travel. And so out of this, we've got hundreds more Lib Dem councillors, we've got our 100,000 members up and down the country, we've got an energised base. That's a great position to be going into the European elections with, and I encourage everyone that's been out there campaigning and maybe a bit tired after the last few weeks, have a cup of tea and then get back out on the doorsteps, because we've got an election in 3 weeks' time, and the Lib Dem cause to say we need to stop Brexit for the future of our country, to make sure we get the benefits of being in the EU. That case needs to be made more than ever.
OK, Jo Swinson, Deputy Leader of the Liberal Democrats, thank you very much for your time today. Certainly, if you're involved in political life, you certainly need a lot of stamina at the moment, don't you? A bit more than a cup of tea as well. Several cups of tea and cups of coffee, I think, plenty of caffeine. For the moment, back now to Joanna in the studio, but much more from here very soon.
Thank you very much, Anita. Yes, let's take a look at how the elections have played out in South East England. Our political correspondent, Ellie Price, is in Thanet. Give us the view from there, Ellie.
Well, the view from here is, well, they've just started counting. I think probably to start with a bit of context, because cast your mind back to the last time these elections were held, 4 years ago here in Thanet, UKIP were riding high. Nigel Farage was down in the patch practically every week, because he was, of course, campaigning to stand in the parliamentary seat here. Now, he didn't make it. The Conservatives pipped him to the post at the general election, but UKIP swept to power to take control of Thanet District Council, the first council it would control in the whole of the UK. But after that, unfortunately, the realities of government for UKIP seemed rather stark, and there were a number of defections, and last year a mass exodus of UKIP councillors left the party over a big row over the local airport here and the future of what should happen to Manston Airport. So in this election, you don't need a crystal ball, you don't need to wait for the count to be over to discover that actually the vote will collapse. UKIP have only managed to field 3 candidates here in Thanet. So the question will be not what happens to UKIP, the question will be what happens to UKIP voters and where do they go here in Thanet.
Thank you very much, Ellie. Well, let's get the view from North East England. We can go to our Look North political editor, Richard Moss in Newcastle, where they are counting. Anything expected imminently, Richard?
Probably another few hours away from results here. This is the North of Tyne mayor race. Now, this is the first time this election's been held. It's one of these metro mayors, a bit like Andy Burnham in Greater Manchester. Far less powers, it has to be said. But this mayor will cover the area of Newcastle, where we are, North Tyneside and Northumberland. A huge geographical area, right up to the Scottish border and Berwick, and combining urban and rural. But this is a contest that has raised some questions. All the candidates are men. There are 5, so there's been a questions about why none of the parties managed to find a woman to stand. All the metro mayors around the country are currently men, so this will just add to that particular problem. But there's also been questions about what this might result in, because the leading candidate, the Labour candidate Jamie Driscoll, is a big wheel in momentum here. He's a big Jeremy Corbyn supporter. He's talked about radical socialist policies, democratic socialism enacted in large in this role here, but others have characterised that pretty colourfully. The Conservatives have called it trying to create Venezuela on Tyne, which is rather dramatic, of course, but whereas Jamie Driscoll says he's just trying to copy really what a lot of European countries do, set up a regional bank, set up regional utility companies, try and make sure that more money is spent by public bodies in the local economy here. But we're expecting a declaration sometime around 2:30 and 3. We're expecting it to go to a second count where the 2 leading contenders out of the 5 will have a runoff, and second choice votes may come into play then and make a difference.
Thank you very much. Let's go back to Westminster, get some more reaction with Annita McVeigh. Back to you.
Joanna, thank you. Yes, joining me to discuss all the results so far of these local elections are Polly Mackenzie, Chief Executive of Demos and former Special Advisor to Nick Clegg, Sienna Rogers, Editor of Labour List, and Joey Jones, who's a former spokesman for Theresa May. Welcome to all of you. Polly, let's begin with you first of all. Vince Cable declaring in Chelmsford a little while ago and on Twitter that 3-party politics is back. Is he right?
Well, yeah, the Liberal Democrats have done really well in coming back up from an enormously low base set in 2015 when they were punished for the kind of the crimes in the public eye of the coalition. And I think we've had this massive question since then, is it possible for the Lib Dems ever to recover? And what the results seem to suggest is that actually, partly because of the enormous mistakes that the other 2 parties are making, the Liberal Democrats have managed to shake off some at least of that toxic brand and able to win back the voters' hearts and minds. Though, of course, independents have also done well. I think the most defining thing that we've seen overnight is that people are just really, really unenthusiastic about what's on offer, both from Labour and the Conservatives.
I suppose the follow-up question is that a positive vote for the Lib Dems as a Remain party or a protest vote?
I think it's probably a combination of both. But the 2 parties aren't managing to gather kind of any enthusiasm. I think it's mostly a sort of anti-politics despair vote that we've seen.
Sienna, Labour, obviously some losses that they are very disappointed about. They would have been doing better, wouldn't they, if it hadn't been for Brexit and this, fence sitting that Jeremy Corbyn has been engaged in the view of many.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's undeniable that Brexit has impacted the Labour vote, and I mean, the interesting thing about this set of results is that it's basically further entrenching the Brexit divisions within the party, because everyone is saying, I've been proved right tonight. My set of results that I'm looking at show that I'm right about this. And, the people who are against a public vote, a people's vote, are saying, well, no, actually, like Ian Lavery was saying to you earlier, we've got to scrap any sort of anti-Brexit message. So
you know, just the divides in those parties are just getting wider and wider apart.
Yes, Ian Lavery and then Jeremy Corbyn himself in Sale saying, you know, that Labour's message in austerity has been drowned out by Brexit, which has been completely the dominant issue. So does that mean that Labour will think, that Jeremy Corbyn will think, well, he needs to get a deal done with Theresa May so that they can get past Brexit and stop?
People in his shadow's cabinet and his allies and himself, you know, they don't want to push for a public vote, and they do just want to get Brexit over and done with so they can start talking about the impact of austerity.
So Sienna, you're talking about Jeremy's problem, Joey Jones, Theresa's problem. You know, she's got a big problem with these results. I mean, some within the Conservative circles have been talking up the possibility of 1,000 seats lost. Will we get to that symbolic figure? Let's see. But, you know, it's a bad day for the Conservatives, isn't it?
It is, and yet, to echo one of the things that Sienna was saying, that everybody will go out there saying this result proves me right. The Prime Minister will probably say that her argument that people are sick of Brexit and they just want to get this done has been vindicated as well. So she will see a silver lining there. For me personally, there's one thing that has made my eyes roll to the back of my head over the past few weeks. It's when people say the position of the British people is clear. The British people want, and then it's basically they want what I want, you know. And equally, in terms of the election result, people are going around saying this proves my point. I think that, to be honest, the British people want a bunch of different things, and the one thing that unites them is that they're all, to some degree, greater or lesser, going to be disappointed. The one thing I would draw out of these results, I think, is telling in terms of the ongoing negotiations between Labour and the Conservative Party, is that if people in the Labour High Command thought that a Tory collapse would hand them a free pass to Downing Street, they have been proven wrong here. Labour is being just as badly damaged by what's going on in Westminster as the Tories, and they can't just waltz into Downing Street on the back of that.
How difficult is Theresa May's position as leader off the back of these results and going into difficult European elections?
It's as difficult as it always is. She has been hanging by a thread, confounding normal political gravity for ever and a day, and the only reason that she's really still in there is because none of the potential candidates that are doing this beauty contest for Conservative leadership really want the current conundrum to have to deal with for themselves, so they're not willing to precipitate a move on her. That may still continue to be the case even after the European elections, but I think those talks between Labour and the Tories will have to either break up or come to some sort of resolution before the European elections happen. And this will concentrate minds within Downing Street, within the government, but also within the leadership of the Labour Party as to whether or not they do need to actually find a compromise way forward.
Just a quick thought from each of you, if we can squeeze it in. We've only got a minute, literally, so probably not realistically, but, you know, where does the psychology of this vote with, you know, some of that Conservative vote and Labour vote going to Remain parties and ahead of the European elections, where does this leave us? Just a line from each of you.
Well, I just think Remain voters don't feel represented by either of the big parties, even though the majority of the Labour vote is Remain. It's used to say you voted for a Brexit party.
Sienna?
I mean, the Labour membership are saying, oh, the fact that Remain parties have won here proves that we should have more of an anti-Brexit message, but then the Euro elections, the Brexit party is set to do very well, so what can you take from that?
And I just say, look, you'll get a big Brexit vote in the Europeans, you'll get a big Remain vote in the Europeans, but there's no outlet for those parties in a general election in a first-past-the-post system.
It's been really good to hear. It's really good. Polly says it's a mess. It's really good to hear your opinions on this. It is still very, very divided. Polly Mackenzie, Joey Jones and Sienna Rogers, thank you all very much. Much more from Westminster throughout the afternoon.
Welcome back to the BBC's Election Centre, where it does seem that voters have decided to punish both Conservatives and Labour. Good afternoon. We've had about half the results in, and so far they make rather grim reading for both Conservatives and Labour in different ways, because instead it's the Lib Dems who are celebrating. Look at this.
To be part of a Liberal Democrat majority.
Because the Lib Dems have gained over 320 seats so far. Extra councillors, they won overall control of councils like Winchester, Bath and North Norfolk, and indeed Chelmsford. where the Lib Dem leader Vince Cable was out this morning visiting his new team and congratulating them. So they're very happy. The Conservatives are, well, less happy because they're already down 477 seats. There's still a long way to go. They gained Walsall, but they lost places like Worcester, Peterborough and St Albans. Big surprise maybe for many people is that Labour are not doing nearly as well as they'd hoped. The party did gain Trafford from the Tories, but Mr Corbyn's party lost both Bolsover and Wirral, and overall, at the moment, they're down 72 seats. And this is Mr Corbyn in Trafford this morning, and just visiting workers there in rather heavy rain, but not dampening the party workers' spirits there because they're pleased with the result. But we will be talking about other areas where Mr Corbyn has not performed as well as some people had thought he might.
And with more than 100 councils still counting this afternoon, I'll be here at the giant touchscreen analysing the results as they come in.
Our chief political correspondent, Vicky Young, is also here with her take on how this might affect the Brexit deadlock at Westminster. So stay with us throughout the afternoon on Election 2019. Well, lots of counting still going on and lots of results to come. So let me tell you, we've had 116 councils declared, but we have 132 to go. And we've had more than 3,000 council seats declared, but we have more than 5,000 to go. So I'm just underlining at this point, if you're joining us and have not been with us overnight, that there's still quite a long way to go on this story. Let's have a look at some of the scenes around the country at the moment. And there we have the counting going on in Great Yarmouth, and this really is a Conservative Labour battle. A few UKIP seats there in the past, but this really is something we're focusing on in terms of how Labour and the Tories are shaping up in the east of England. And then if we go down to Kent, this is Thanet. Now, this, of course, where UKIP won an overall majority last time. It's first authority, but it all turned into a bit of a shambles with the UKIP group because it's now a Conservative minority administration, thanks to all those UKIP defections that took place. The counting's still going on there. We'll keep an eye on that. We're also looking at Warwick because the Conservatives in Warwick are defending their hold on power there in an area that voted Remain back in 2016, so the dynamics there are slightly different to places like Great Yarmouth and Thanet, so we'll be looking at Warwick as well. And another interesting example for us is York. We'll be in the city of York. It's currently run by a Conservative Lib Dem minority administration. Labour hoping to make some gains here. It's had some parliamentary representation in York in the past, but we'll be looking at the Lib Dems now as well, given how they've done overnight, to see what's going on in York as well. So just three little tasters, or four little tasters for you there. Let me introduce my panel for the next hour, because they very kindly joined us. Layla Moran for the Lib Dems, the Shadow Home Secretary for Labour, Diane Abbott, and the Local Government Secretary, James Brokenshire. Good to have you all with us. Thank you all for coming in. We'll have a chat in just a second and ask you how you're all doing. And we'll also be talking to Vicky as well. Just a quick recap at this point on the actual scoreboard, because it's worth just reminding ourselves of what's going on. These numbers are changing as we speak. So right now it's the Conservatives having lost 478, Labour having lost 73 councillors, the Lib Dems having put on 322. And I can tell you the Greens are up by 45. They've had a strong night. The Independents are up by 217, which is another big showing for them. And UKIP, as things stand, a fraction of the candidates they put up last time, and certainly if you go back 4 years and more, but they've lost 54. So that's the main scoreboard. We'll come back and have a chat with the panel in a moment, but let's join Joanna for the day's news.
Thank you, Huw. The Conservatives, as we have been hearing, have lost heavily in the local election results last night. Labour also facing a backlash at the ballot box, apparently over the Brexit deadlock. Smaller parties and independents have won seats. With local council results continuing to come in for England and Northern Ireland, national politics seems to have been a deciding factor for voters. The Liberal Democrat leader, Sir Vince Cable, insisted his party's success was more than just a protest vote. 115 of the 248 councils up for election have so far declared their results. Our political correspondent, Chris Mason, has this report.
Tradition dictates the morning after elections, party leaders head somewhere that will allow them to smile. There's not been many laughs for Liberal Democrats in recent years, but they're upbeat today.
Well, I'm just celebrating a really great result here. Chelmsford, Essex, but this story across the country. You know, the Lib Dems were written off at one point, but we're coming back very, very strongly. We're the big winners of the night.
The Lib Dems won control of councils in Bath, Winchester, North Norfolk and the Cotswolds. The Labour leaders headed for Trafford in Greater Manchester, where Labour have taken control. But they lost control in Hartlepool, the Wirral and Bolsover.
We have won Trafford to an overall majority. We have swings to Labour in a number of boroughs across the whole of councils across the whole of the country, and that gives us a basis on which we can win marginal seats such as Swindon, such as Thurrock and other places, and I'm looking forward to an election that we do that.
Beyond these glum faces, there's a row over whether Labour should shift on Brexit. Some saying towards another referendum, others towards getting a deal with the EU sorted. Overall, the Conservatives haven't got much to smile about either. Yes, they held Swindon and gained North East Lincolnshire, but lost control in St Albans, Southend, Broxtowe and Peterborough.
I think what it is actually, it's a verdict on Brexit as a whole and the Parliament as a whole. It's sort of almost popped on all your houses, and so my view is we've just got to get this done. That's what people want.
Independents have done well so far, as has the Green Party.
We've broken through on 16 new councils, really cementing our place as the fourth party in England in local government, and a real momentum, I think, going into the European elections. Of course, we're the biggest representation of any Remain party in the European Parliament at the moment.
There are plenty more results to come, with the parties watching closely, peering into what it might mean for their wider fortunes. Oh, and here, at daft o'clock in the morning, was this some cross-party collaboration? Or perhaps commiseration? Chris Mason, BBC News.
Following the losses for the Conservative Party, the former Cabinet Minister Priti Patel has called for a change of leadership. She says Brexit and impatience with Theresa May kept coming up on the doorstep.
I think, you know, where we've got to now look at these results, look at our direction of travel going forward as a party. I think obviously our party leadership and our party nationally needs to look at the situation and make some very, very serious decisions now in terms of where we go.
Where would you like to see it go?
Well, I think we need change. I mean, I just don't think we can continue like this. I've been very clear, quite frankly. Many of my constituents have said this to me, you know, we need change. We need a change of leadership. Perhaps the time has now come for that.
The UKIP vote collapsed overnight. The party lost more than 54 council seats. A spokesperson for the party said the party had been in turmoil for 2 years, but they had taken votes off the main parties. Counting is underway in Northern Ireland. A total of 462 seats are up for grabs across 11 councils. The first few results have started to trickle in, but most results are expected later today or Saturday morning. Well, that's it for now. Back to election 2019 with you.
Yes, welcome back to the election centre. So keeping tabs on the results as they come in, but importantly, of course, looking at each of the parties and asking some searching questions about how they've performed and where they've not performed as well as they expected. Why was that? Vicky's with me, and I'm just wondering, Vicky, at this point, just take us through the main headlines as you see them for the parties here.
You know, I think it's clear the Liberal Democrats are having a very good night. The smiles you saw on the activists' faces after, let's face it, some torrid years. The coalition took its toll. They've been, you know, wiped out almost at the general election. Their councillor base has been decimated. This looks like the signs of them starting to come back into it, trying to rebuild, trying to show they can run councils and, you know, really make inroads in the areas still still where they've always been strong. They're not necessarily branching into many new areas as yet, but they will be absolutely thrilled at that. Important to remember, though, they haven't got the Change UK party up against them in these elections, so they have had a bit more of a free run. Now, of course, the Conservatives is looking like a very bad set of election results. Now, they will say they're coming from a high base. They've, of course, been in power in government for several years. They would expect to take a hit, but I think it could be even worse, maybe, than they were fearing. And for Labour, there isn't much comfort here. This is a party that wants to get into government, that has been facing a Conservative government in all sorts of trouble, disarray and chaos, for a couple of years, and yet they're not really making the inroads they need to make in order to come back strongly. So I think this is showing us, along with a surge in independence, an appetite for something different, a bit of a backlash against Westminster, I think, and the main two parties. And why has it happened? Now, we haven't been knocking on doors, but of course lots of councillors have. Many of them have lost their seats tonight. And in both Labour and Conservative cases, they're looking at councils they've lost and they're saying we have been let down by the parties at Westminster, and they think that Brexit is a factor.
Well, that's certainly, a set of messages that we got loud and clear overnight. So we'll develop some of those in a moment. Why don't we have a look at some of the key results so far before I talk to the panel here, and Rita can take us through those.
Let me take you through some of the notable council results that we've had that reflect the overall story, which is of Lib Dem successes, largely at the expense of the Conservatives, and Labour not making the advances that they would have wanted to make. Vale of White Horse, this is a Lib Dem gain from the Conservatives. And let me just show you on the screen here. The Lib Dems have gained this with 31 seats. Now, this was a Conservative council. It had been Conservative since 2011, and the Lib Dems have gained that. And if I show you the seat change here, that shows you exactly what's happened. The Conservatives have lost 23. Almost all of those seats have gone to the Liberal Democrats. If we go back to the main screen, the other Liberal Democrat gain on this screen, Somerset West and Taunton. Now, this is a brand new council. It's been formed by the merger of two councils, Taunton and West Somerset. Both these councils were Conservative, and it was largely thought that this new council would therefore be Conservative as well, with Liberal Democrat opposition. In fact, look what's happened. The Liberal Democrats have got it with a majority of one, but it's a win. That's very unexpected. The Conservatives on 10 seats and Independents on 14, so a strong showing there from the Independents. And look at that, the Conservatives have lost 31 seats based on the notional aggregate of seats they would have had in the two former councils. Let me take you back to the main screen to look at the overall picture. So the Conservatives losing Folkestone and Hythe there, and that's interesting, partly because there was quite a Green surge of votes. That was partly the reason for the Conservatives losing that council. Better news for the Tories in North East Lincolnshire. They gained that council from no overall control. I've got Ashfield here in Nottinghamshire. Now, that's an interesting one. That was a hung council, and it's now in pink, as you can see, which means the Independents are the major presence on that council, and that's another story of this election, of the Independents doing very well. A few Labour results here. So Bolsover and Wirral used to be Labour. They've lost control of those councils. Better news for Labour in Amber Valley, where they've taken this council from the Conservatives, and look at that. Labour on 26, Conservatives on 16. This had been a Conservative council since 2015. But if we just have a little look at the seat change, Conservatives down 7, and their seats divided up between Labour and the Greens. And another very interesting screen always is the share change. And look at that. That gives you a really interesting insight into what's going on in Amber Valley, because not only are Labour gaining in their share of the vote, but so are the Greens and so are the Liberal Democrats. And that feeds into this idea, this theme of this election, that it has been a plague on the houses of the two main parties, with the smaller parties benefiting.
Rita, thank you very much. And taking us through quite a few of the interesting results there, and we'll talk a little bit about what they might mean. But there is counting still going on. I mentioned Great Yarmouth earlier on in the east of England. Some notable gains and losses in the east of England, which is, of course, a very significant electoral area. And if we see Basildon moving out of Conservative hands, St Albans likewise, Chelmsford now in the hands of the Lib Dems, and North Norfolk. Tendring, well, that's the area around Clacton, where Douglas Carswell won that by-election, of course, as we remember, and the strong UKIP presence there, and Southend-on-Sea as well, out of Conservative hands. So Andrew Sinclair is our political editor in the east of England. Andrew, you're in Great Yarmouth. Just to tell us what's going on.
Well, the story of the night, as you said, has really been the Liberal Democrats. They've picked up 2 councils overnight. North Norfolk, which you just mentioned, they doubled the number of seats that they had on that council to take full control of it. Previously, it had been run by the Conservatives as a minority administration. But the big story of the night was down in Chelmsford. Until yesterday, the Lib Dems had just 5 seats. Now they have 31. That's why you saw Vince Cable there a few minutes ago congratulating his party supporters, because the Lib Dems really just can't believe how well they've done down there. And the Lib Dems have had successes across this very Conservative region last night. They made gains in Southend, which helped take the council away from the Conservatives and into no overall control. And as you were saying, it has been a very bad night in places for the Conservatives. They lost control of Peterborough, they lost control of Basildon and Southend. They failed to take their target council of Colchester. They may well lose Great Yarmouth here to no overall control. 2 other things to note. First of all, just as Vicky was saying, we have seen here in the east a big increase in the number of independent candidates getting elected and Green Party candidates getting elected. So clearly there is some sort of backlash going on here, much in evidence against the Westminster parties. The other very interesting thing involves spoilt ballot papers. Here in Great Yarmouth, there are no Liberal Democrats or Greens standing. So if you want to protest, what do? Now, normally in any ward, you'll have about half a dozen, perhaps a dozen spoilt ballot papers. But in some of the wards here this morning, we've had 119 spoilt ballot papers, 82 in another ward, 62 in another ward. And we're hearing this sort of thing from other counts across the region as well. I'm told the word traitor appears on quite a few of those spoilt ballot papers. Quite a few other words are used which we won't use at this time of day. Quite a few of the papers are left blank as well, but it does seem that there's been a big increase in spoilt ballots in this election.
Well, we'll pick that up as well, Andrew. That's very interesting. But on the Great Yarmouth count itself, how is that progressing? And tell us a little more about what Conservative Party workers are saying about their prospects there.
Well, it looks as if things might just about stay the same. I think that, well, the Conservatives have already lost 1 seat to an independent. They expect to possibly lose another 1 or 2, perhaps to Labour. Labour are making a couple of gains here. But Great Yarmouth is supposed to, or always used to be, a bellwether area. Normally, whoever ran the council would go on to become MP. And the current MP here is the Conservative Party chairman, Brandon Lewis. So Labour are making a few gains, but frankly they're saying the atmosphere on the doorsteps was so bad this time, both against them and the Conservatives, they'll be quite happy if they hold on to the existing seats that they have. So Labour making gains, but they're not making the sort of gains they should be making if we are as close to a general election as many people think they are. They held on to their councils in Cambridge and Harlow last night. But once again, those are Labour strongholds. They should be doing better there, and they should be doing better in other parts of the east of England. We haven't seen that much evidence of it, and I don't think we're going to see that much evidence of Labour doing very well here in Great Yarmouth.
Interesting again. Andrew, thanks very much. Andrew Sinclair there for us in Great Yarmouth, and we'll be keeping an eye on that result when it comes in. Well, Leila, it's been a good night for you so far. I mean, coming off some, you know, let's be honest, a set of pretty awful results in recent years. Is this what people are calling just a backlash in just a general way, like a protest vote, or what accounts for this, do you think?
No, well, you're right. We were coming from a low base, but what it says is that the Liberal Democrats are back. You know, these are the best results that we've had for sure by some way since 2003. And in fact, if we head, as we may well over the course of today, over into the late 400s, that will be the best local election results this party has had in its entire history. what I was seeing on the doorsteps is actually it wasn't necessarily about Brexit. Certainly the suppression of the other party's votes may well be. But what I was finding in the Vale of White Horse, where we took it quite emphatically, also South Oxfordshire District Council, honestly, we weren't expecting to be the largest party on that council today, but there we are. And it was actually, we have a record there. They know that we are a hard-working, local party. The Liberal Democrats have always had their roots in localism. This is absolutely, as Vicky said earlier, the growing back of those Lib Dem roots. And actually, I think it is a sign that we are back and we're here to stay.
It's not people being fed up with the Tories and Labour, determined not to vote for them, and in some areas you're just the option that's there.
Not at all.
It's the only option available
Not
to them.
at all. So in Oxford, West and Abingdon, in fact, we had me elected back in 2017, which actually, frankly, I wasn't expecting either. We then had, shock wins in South Cambridgeshire last year, and this was the year that we were expecting we would make these large gains. So actually, if you look at it over the course of time, this has been a slow, steady story that actually is quite consistent. Liberal Democrats, where we are in areas, particularly Shire, Tory-facing, Remain-facing areas, but not just that. If you look at other parts of the country, we made gains in Sunderland, incredibly Brexit-facing area. This is not just about Brexit. We are refinding our feet, and it's about time too.
Diane, you want to form the next government.
Yes, of course.
That's what Labour wants to do.
It's not just that we want to do it, the country needs it.
Well, you want, all right, but you certainly, that is obviously your goal as an opposition. And I'm just wondering, what is your honest assessment of, making losses, albeit nothing like the Tory losses, but, you're down 76 seats at the moment, and, there's more results to come. That, in all honesty, does not suggest that the party is in a kind of springboard position for government, does it?
Well, as far as the possibility of a general election is concerned, we would say bring it on. We have won some of our target areas, like Manchester, Trafford. The Tories have lost over 400-odd councillors. We've lost 70 plus. Now, when we went into the 2017 general election, the polls had us 20 points behind. We made up those 20 points in the course of that election because in an election we get fairer and more balanced coverage under law. So, we're not frightened of a general election. We believe we can win.
On the basis of this result, and this is real people with real votes, voting for councillors and councils and local services, and, with Labour making a strong pitch in many areas for votes on that basis, on the local issue basis, not on the Brexit thing, on the local issue basis, why on earth are you making losses? What's your reading of the position that is allowing you to lose seats?
Well, the general issue was, what we were picking up on the doorstep was that people were talking about Brexit. I mean, talking about a national issue in a way that's unusual in local elections. And sadly, people were blaming the political class as a whole for the impasse over Brexit.
Well, not us.
If you'd allow me to finish. People were blaming the political class as a whole for the impasse over Brexit. I mean, on the Lib Dems, look, the Lib Dems were decimated because of their involvement in the Tory coalition. I mean, Lib Dems in London were heartbroken about Lib Dems getting into bed with the Tories. They've now come back to their traditional role as a receptacle for protest votes. But we've seen these Lib Dem surges before, and they don't translate into real gains in a general election. We say to the Tories in relation to a general election, bring it on.
James, look at these figures. You're down 495 at the moment, and in all probability it'll increase. And James cleverly was sitting there many hours ago, really saying that it wouldn't be great if it was up towards the 800 or whatever, or even higher than that. What's your reading of where you are now?
Well, we knew this was going to be a difficult set of elections in terms of, firstly, the context to this, the high watermark. These seats were up in 2015 last time round, where the Liberal Democrats did have hundreds and hundreds of losses, so about the worst result they'd seen in 40 years. We'd had the boost of the general election on turnout, and therefore some of it is that stage in the cycle. But There's no doubt that Brexit has had an impact on this. I think Diane acknowledges some of that and how that has affected my party, and it's painful to see the losses that we have, but also the Labour Party, where the Labour Party were expecting to make gains in places like Swindon. They didn't do it there. In places like Stoke, where Jeremy Corbyn launched the local election campaign for the Labour Party, and actually they reversed. The Conservatives gaining 8 seats in Stoke, a really fantastic result there. But I know this is very painful, and it is really tough when I look at all of those really hard-working Conservative councillors who have strong records to show locally that have been impacted by the Brexit feeling. That utter frustration out there as to why we haven't left and why you haven't sorted it out.
We'll ask more about that. I want to bring in Jess Phillips, the Labour MP, who's in our studio in Birmingham. I think, Jess, yes? Good afternoon, actually, by now. Your take on Labour's performance, what's your reading of it?
I mean, I think that the problem across the board for both the Labour Party and the Conservative Party, but I suppose I'm much more expert in the Labour Party, is that we haven't had a clear message, and that has clearly translated that those who had a clear message last night, and unfortunately, I wish it wasn't true, but this does seem to have been about Brexit much more so than any normal local election would have been, seem to have prospered much better, as Layla was saying about the Liberal Democrats. I think the reality is that the Labour Party, people don't know where it stands at the moment with regard to Brexit. And to be honest, I'm not sure. I don't know what's going to happen next week. I genuinely don't know what our position is going to be. So if people are going to the ballot box and they don't know what we stand for. And do you know what? I think that people really genuinely don't mind if they disagree with it. What they want to see is courage and leadership. And people write to me all the time and say, I don't always agree with you. People aren't always going to be utterly happy with what we've got to say, but we should say something.
Say what?
Well, in my opinion, and actually, do you know what? I'm not going to even say necessarily what we should say, because what everybody does and what all of the panel are going to do in front of you during this programme, and everybody was doing last night, is they're going to say that these election results mean that their predetermined idea about Brexit was right, or about anything, and I'm not going to do that. I obviously think that we need to have a confirmatory referendum on any deal before we even dare to agree to trying to bail the Tories out. That was my existing position before. It's still my position. I'm not going to say that it's very clear that that's what these results say, although there is evidence for both sides in this. But I think that the Labour Party need to genuinely decide whether they're going to be a party that backs Brexit or they're going to be a party that doesn't back Brexit. All this messing around, faffing about is a nonsense.
You see, the point is, Jess, you're saying that, and then last night we were talking to the leader of the Labour group on Sunderland, and he was very forthright, saying, look, this talk of a second referendum on people's vote is killing us. People hate it. They don't want this. They don't like this idea. They don't like the thought that Labour is going to be associated with that. So, what do you say to somebody in your own party who's saying that to you?
I say it's really weird that loads of them voted for the Greens and the Lib Dems then. The idea that protest voting in Sunderland about Brexit went for the most Remain parties, notwithstanding those that voted Conservative or for UKIP up there, which frankly I find phenomenal, that UKIP is still even seen as being even slightly credible considering my own personal experience with them recently. However, the other thing I think that is a problem is that the Labour Party has a problem, if you look at wider data from across this election and others, that it is gentrifying and that it does much better in areas where people are posher. And Sunderland, I think that there's other questions we have to ask about where the Labour Party might have gone wrong in Sunderland.
Just stay with us. Dan, this business of clarity,
actually,
or lack of it, what do you say?
I think we have been clear. We've been clear that what we really want is a general election. There's nothing in these results, actually, to get us to swerve from that.
But that's not in your gift, Diane, is it? That's the problem.
No. But you asked me, I've been asked about clarity. We've been clear that what we really want is a general election. In the event that there isn't a general election, we are prepared to look at the circumstances in which a second referendum would be a way out of the current deadlock. But let me say this. We have a more challenging position than either the Conservatives or the Lib Dems. We represent some of the strongest pro-Remain areas, like my own constituency of Hackney North, but also some of the strongest Leave areas, like some of those constituencies in the North and the Midlands. And what we are seeking to do as a party, and it's easy for some people to jeer, we want to hold the country together, because when in the end this whole Brexit debate is over, there'll be a country to bring together. And I'm concerned that Theresa May never mentions the 48% of people that voted Remain. Equally, the Lib Dems never mentioned 52% that voted to leave and why they wanted to leave. What we have sought to do, and it's difficult, and you get jeered at by journalists, but we are trying to hold the country together.
Well, not just jeered at by journalists, you have colleagues who question, you know, the approach, and that's the issue.
Well, I'm sorry that some colleagues don't understand our position, but we've set it out over and over, and it reflects the position of the party at conference. By no means do we rule out a second referendum, but we're not a second referendum in any circumstances party. We're a party that wants what's best for the country, and we're a party that wants to try and bring the party together. It's easy if all you're going to do is talk to Leave voters. It's easy if all you're going to do is talk to Remain voters. But for a national party seeking government, we have to hold the party together.
Jess, what do you make of that?
Well, as somebody who has a very Remain and very pro-second referendum position but is in a Leave seat, I'm only too aware of how we have to keep the country together. And whilst we might want a general election, I want, you know, to be a size 10, but I just keep eating cake. You don't just get what you want. A general election is not the thing that is in front of us. Brexit is the thing that is in front of us. We have to just show courage and leadership. And like I say, people loved Jeremy Corbyn because they thought that he was honest and that he would come out and say what he actually thought. And what he seems to think on this is a bit like, oh, well, we'll see. And that is, I just don't understand why the Labour Party doesn't lean into the genuine asset that it has, is that it's meant to be principled, it's meant to be outward facing, it is meant to be internationalist. These are the things that people want to see, and I just cannot understand why we can't be much, much clearer. Let the Tories play with the Brexit ball and let it wreck them. Why on earth are we allowing it to do the same thing to us that it has done to the Tories for 40 years?
But hang on a sec, what is unprincipled about saying we'd like a general election? If we can't have it, we would then consider the circumstances around a people's vote or a second referendum. What's unprincipled about that?
The fact of the matter is how are we going to get a general election? Brexit is happening right now. If you go on any doorstep, as the Minister for the government had said, that people just want something to happen. They are sick of this constant impasse. So if we're saying, oh, well, we want this other thing to happen, what is our position going to be in a general election? Are we going to be pro-Remain? Are we going to seek a second referendum with Remain on the ballot? What would our position be on this, the massive issue of the time during a general election? I want rid of the Tories. I am absolutely sick to death of what they're doing to the people where I live, utterly sick to death. But we have to deal with this issue, and people can see that in Westminster we're failing, and that is why they are saying a plague on all our houses.
Jess, thanks very much for joining us. Good to have you with us today. And Dan, on that specific point, because people will want an answer, you know, if you go into a general election, what will you be saying?
Well, it depends where the Brexit negotiations are then. But just on this question...
If they are where they are now, with no deal.
Just on this question that we lack courage and principle, Jeremy and Corbyn has gone into some of the hardest Leave voting areas in the country and tried to say to them that if you are struggling, if you are unemployed, if you have concerns for your children's future, your issues are the same in Leave areas as they are in Remain areas. We have not done what the Tories have done, which is try and scapegoat migrants. We have shown courage and we have shown principles, and we'll continue to do so.
Vicky, a couple of points you were going to make there on
yeah, well,
stuff
first
that
of
you're
all, Diane,
picking up.
more bad news for Labour. Confirmed loss of Cannock Chase Council there, and it's looking like losing as well Kirklees. So a couple of gains, but more losses on councils at the moment. And to Diane, what do you think is the way through? I mean, as Jess says there's no general election at the moment. Brexit is the issue that is facing the parties. Could it be a deal with the Conservatives to get a Brexit deal through that's as close to what you want as you possibly can?
We have to think of what's best for the country. The deal that Theresa May is currently offering is not a good deal.
But a deal that's closer to what you want.
The deal that the Tories, I think you'll find, have not moved from their original red lines. And the deal that they're offering is not in the interests of the country.
Is that right, James?
No, well,
You've not moved at all. I mean, if you have moved, tell us where.
Well, the talks are ongoing, and Diane is speaking as if there's no discussion, no sense of being able to move forward, and what are described as very serious discussions to find that space of compromise where we don't have a majority in the House of Commons. That's the palpable calculus that we're confronting, and notable that John McDonnell this morning has been saying, well, we need to fix Brexit. And therefore, that sense that I think everyone has picked up on the doorsteps, and it's been notable that the focus has been on the Liberal Democrats, understandably, for the gains that they've made. But
so, which of your red lines are you moving on?
If I may, Diane, I think it's that sense of the real sense that they want to punish both political parties. That's why you've seen Greens, you've seen Independents, you've seen Liberal Democrats. And I think there is a strong sense of protest because that fundamental issue of not having got on with this. So it does come down to the discussions where we know that there is focus around this issue of the customs arrangement, those negotiations between our two parties that are ongoing, and our sense is that is serious, and that we find that space.
But which of your red lines
are you moving on? That's on the table.
Well, there are clearly discussions that have been taking place around a range of issues, such as customs and in relation to those factors on entrenchment of rights on workers, on the environment, on those other issues too, to see where there is that space. But clearly, we've got to come back to both of our parties to see that garners that support, because this is complicated. We want to ensure that we deliver on Brexit. That's the profound message that everyone has given to us, but we need to ensure there is a solid, robust majority in the Commons to be able to do that, to get that ratification through and to make it happen.
Dan, if you don't think they're moving, or if you don't think they're entering this in good faith or whatever, why are you in the talks in the first place?
We're in the talks because we want to try and serve the best interests of the country. But as we speak, the Tories have not moved on a single one of their red lines. And there can be no basis for a deal without them moving.
The interesting is that it's compromise on both sides. Diane equally now seems to be saying that the Labour Party is not prepared to compromise. That's not our sense. And interestingly, on the whole issue of customs, our sense is that Labour wants the benefit of the customs, of frictionless trade. There's a lot of, I think, overlap in terms of what's in the current political declaration in terms of advancing all of that. And therefore, in the national interest, I think we all need to reflect on how we are able to move forward and to deliver on Brexit.
We'll be back here in a moment. What I'd like to do is join my colleague Annita, who's down at Westminster with some guests there. Annita?
Huw, thank you very much. Yes, well, I suppose the big question in all of this as we watch these results come in, and of course there are still many to be declared, is what impact these local elections, possibly the least local elections we've ever had, will have on a possible Brexit deal, or indeed the future of the Brexit process. To discuss all of this with me now, I have Tom Newton-Dunn and Stephen Bush, the political editors respectively of The Sun and New Statesman. Welcome to both of you. Tom Newton-Dunn, first of all to you, what is your interpretation of what we've seen so far?
Well, the first caveat, I think we need to be slightly careful about attaching any massive, sweeping, important political generalisations on a vote, which will almost certainly turn out to be less than a third of the entire country, possibly being below 30%. There is a lesson in itself, which is people staying away out of protest, but the results are patchy all over the place. Tories doing well in some unexpected areas, Labour doing well in some areas they didn't think, Lib Dems doing incredibly well in places like Chelmsford, which has been certainly a Tory, Brexity Tory bastion for a very long time. But overall, one theory is there is anger, there is protest, and not just with Brexit. Brexit is clearly, whether you're Remainers or Leavers, you are upset, but also with party leadership. Interesting, the Corbyn factor, the Jeremy Corbyn personal antipathy is now beginning to come through, and we've got now getting Labour MPs talking about that.
Stephen, Jess Phillips there just a moment ago, a thinly veiled attack really on Jeremy Corbyn, saying that what voters want is courage and leadership. What do you think is the future for Jeremy Corbyn and Theresa May based on these results we've seen so far?
Well, I mean, the weird thing about these results is the one thing you'd say the future for both of them is you wouldn't feel confident saying either of these parties was going to form a government anytime soon. But of course, we know logically one of them will somehow be able to form a government after the next election. Obviously, the difference is Theresa May is a figure who we know is not going to be around for very long. Jeremy Corbyn is still hegemonic at the top of the Labour Party. It's going to put pressure on him to do a deal from the bits of his party which are worried about a Brexit backlash. But the bits of his party who are worried about a Lib Dem revival, don't forget there are lots of Labour MPs who came very close to losing their seats in 2005 to 2010 to the Lib Dems, are going to look at this Lib Dem revival, which I think is the really big story tonight, and get quite scared.
Is it a Lib Dem revival that can survive the European elections as well, where it is fighting for the same votes with Change UK, Stephen?
I mean, I think the thing is Change UK have got a lot more media exposure because they're new and shiny, but they have no institutional memory, they have no councillor base. I think if you were going to bet on one of those two sides to come out top, you'd bet on the Lib Dems. They are just a much more serious operation.
Tom, is there a pressure now on Jeremy Corbyn and Theresa May, do you think, to try to get some sort of deal through, to get Brexit over the line, and for, you know, the Conservatives to get on with other issues, for Labour to get on with, especially tackling austerity is the line they've been pushing out in interviews today?
Yeah, there is pressure. There has been pressure for quite a long while now, and obviously they only started talking, well, actually 6 weeks ago, come next week. Interestingly, although it is a very unpalatable thing for both Theresa May and Jeremy Corbyn to do a deal with each other, because it's so appallingly toxic for their party activists, their grassroots, both of them are coming at this from wildly different perspectives. Theresa May has literally nothing to lose. She won't be Tory leader come the autumn, whether she gets a Brexit deal through or not. I think we can be reasonably confident of that. She's already said she's going if she does get this deal through. Jeremy Corbyn wants to go on and be Prime Minister for years to come, and the pressure on him is absolutely enormous. Now, he has this massive dilemma to make. Does he save a bit of abuse in the short term, not do a deal, not be accused of getting a Tory Brexit over the line, or does he think a little bit more strategically, do a soft Brexit deal, split the Tory party forever, and crucially for him, that will then get him out of having to back a second referendum, which he doesn't want when his party come back for conference in the autumn.
And Stephen, just very briefly, if not a deal between Conservatives and Labour right now, what then?
Endless transition. I think that feels like the most likely place, and we're going to end up is just extending and extending in the hope that eventually one side or another can finally get a majority in that place to resolve or not do Brexit as they prefer.
OK, Stephen and Tom, Stephen Bush and Tom Newton-Dunn, thank you both very much indeed. And Huw, it's interesting talking to various people here through the day so far, especially from the Greens, the Lib Dems, who've been doing really well. They are saying, yes, it's because they are strong on local issues, but definitely they argue that they are benefiting from a disillusionment amongst Conservative and Labour voters over Brexit. Where that leaves us, does it leave us any clearer position from where we were a couple of days ago? I'm not entirely sure. Back to you.
Anita, thank you very much, and thanks to your guest, to Annita McVeigh there for us down at Westminster. Well, the Prime Minister, obviously having been digesting these results overnight, and Tories now down 519 council seats. The Prime Minister today, actually, is at the Conservative Spring Conference, which is taking place in mid-Wales, in the rather nice town of Llangollen. But I think the Prime Minister's experience possibly has not been 100% pleasurable, in the sense that we think there was a bit of heckling from within the hall. So let's watch it.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody. And
why don't you resign? The National Convention want you. We don't want you. Get out! Get out! Get out! Get out! And Pryn Honda.
Well, what do we make of that? Because that is a demand for resignation from, we assume, a Conservative Party worker before the Prime Minister even uttered a word in that term. What do we make of that, Vicky?
I mean, it's the resentment, I think, which there's going to be quite widespread as well from both parties. The grassroots councillors have lost their seats, seeing their colleagues booted out and feeling extremely resentful at those at the top of the party. Interesting also in that speech, Theresa May using these election results saying to the Labour and to her own party, look at what's happening here. And she's using it as a very clear signal saying we've got to get on and deliver Brexit. So piling the pressure on both parties to say, look, we've got to focus our minds and get a deal through.
There's just one voice, James, there, but that's painful for the Prime Minister, isn't it?
Well,
at a Conservative conference.
On a night like we've seen, there are clearly tensions, there's frustration, there's upset. I think the reality, though, is that this does not change those numbers in Parliament, and the fact that people may call for change, but that doesn't change the arithmetic, and why the Prime Minister is just absolutely focused and resolute, as Vicky's just said, on delivering on that Brexit outcome. And that is absolutely where her focus, her attention, everything that drives her forward, on that sense of civic and public duty to make it happen.
We've had a similar argument overnight, which is that a change wouldn't alter the parliamentary arithmetic. But there is a strong argument, isn't there, to say that a change of leader would involve a change in the dynamics of the relationship, for example, with Labour, and in the way that the strategy around Brexit is being pursued. So, it's wrong to say, isn't it, that a change of leadership would lead to no change. But in terms of where we are with Brexit, it could lead to quite a big change.
But you'd be thrust into a leadership contest, you'd be thrust into more uncertainty, more speculation, precisely at this moment where we have that chance to make it happen, to get the result that will deliver on Brexit through Parliament. And therefore, as we look forward, as the time is elapsing to prevent, and obviously this is becoming more and more challenging in terms of those European elections, but then what happens thereafter, the chance to actually stop MEPs from ultimately taking up their seats properly if we can get that deal through Parliament. And that is the opportunity we have at the moment.
We'll have a look at a few results with Rita in a second, but listen to this. This is in Tunbridge Wells, and maybe Rita will tell us something about Tunbridge Wells, but just a little story from Tunbridge Wells. In the Paddock Wood West ward in Tunbridge Wells, there was a tie. After two candidates, the Tory and Labour candidates then drew lots. And the lots meant that the Conservative won, which meant that they held the ward. And the previous majority, by the way, there had been over 600. So just a little tidbit for you from the night's events, having to draw lots in Tunbridge Wells itself. That's one of the results you have for us, Rita, yes?
Absolutely, Huw. Well, let's take a look at Tunbridge Wells, given that you've just told us that story. So this is a Conservative hold. They are still counting there, as you can see. There are still 7 seats to declare. This is rock-solid Conservative territory, very much associated in the popular mind with the Conservatives, but some very interesting things going on within that headline of a Conservative hold. Let's just take a little look at the seat change here. The Conservatives have lost 7 seats. Who's benefited? Lib Dems primarily, but also Labour and an independent. And if we just look at the share change, because this is often very revealing, Conservative share of the vote down by 21%. The Lib Dems, the main beneficiaries, but also independents there. Let's take a look at some of the other results that we've had in Burnley. Now, that is a council that's gone from being Labour to a hung council. It's now in no overall control. It had been Labour since the 1970s, and a combination of a surge in support from the smaller parties have helped to tip that into no overall control. Same thing in Cannock Chase in the Midlands. That was Labour, and that's now no overall control. I want to show you one more council here, Stockport. So that was a hung council, and it remains a hung council, but the nature of the race there is interesting. This was a fairly unusual Labour Liberal Democrat race. Labour were just ahead. Now look at them here, absolutely level pegging, 26 seats each. The Conservatives on 8 and the Independents on 3. And let me just show you the share change here. Look at that. Liberal Democrats up by 10%, Conservatives down by 8%, and UKIP's down by 10%. And the Independents and Greens also picking up in the share of the vote too. So, very representative of what we've seen throughout this election.
Rita, thanks very much. And as Rita was taking us through the results. Another one came in from Craven, which is in Yorkshire. This is a Conservative loss. I think it's fair to say it's not one that they'd been expecting. So the result from Craven shows the Tories on 15, the Independents on 9, Labour on 3, the Greens on 2, the Lib Dems on 1. What's the difference then from last time? And if we look at that, it's that the Tories have slipped 3, the Independents have gained 3, Labour no change, the Greens up 1, and the Lib Dems no change, UKIP missing 1. So that's another loss for the Conservatives there. Just looking at the broad pattern, Leila, at this point for you as a party, when you look at the spread, the geographical spread, what does that tell you in terms of, how these various factors are playing?
Yeah, I think it tells us that actually a lot of this was on local issues. We are winning seats in areas where you wouldn't naturally think in this politics that the Liberal Democrats would. Seats that voted Leave, seats in the southwest that people had suggested that we'd lost forever. Where we're winning the councils tends to be in those areas because we've just got the bigger numbers. But actually the fact is this is a national phenomenon. And to suggest that it's a protest vote, I think just means people haven't understood. Politics is changing. People don't want the way it used to be done. They want this new change. That's why Change UK, got so much media attention. But actually what we're seeing on the ground is we've got the infrastructure, we've got the councillors, we've got the messages, and we've got the local records, and we are being rewarded for those on the ground. I just want to also give a shout out to the Greens. So it's true that they're doing really well, and that's great. But actually, we in some places have actually been standing down for them. We've been working together in Vale of White Horse. The one Green we got there was actually on a joint ticket with the Liberal Democrats, and we were putting out joint leaflets talking about grown-up politics, the new politics. This is what it looks like.
Is that the way forward?
I think it may well be, Vicky. I think out there people are sick of tit for tat, red on blue team politics. Actually, what they want is a whole other way of doing things. And Liberal Democrats up and down the country have been showing that we can do that, primarily with the Green Party.
But would you be willing to do that at a general election?
We've already said that we would. Yes, absolutely, we've said that. And where it has worked this time is in areas where we've built up trust slowly over time, where we understand that actually we don't want to merge. We think we've got very different messages to give the country. But actually, let's face it, the first past the post system is broken. It needs changing. But while we've got it, we need to work within it. And interestingly, on the doorstep, this went down really well, really well. People were like, oh, thank goodness, this is what it should be like. So actually, I do think it's the way forward.
Dan, what do you make of that? Because the Lib Dems, that's the argument Leila's giving, but the Lib Dems are street fighters, aren't they? And they are as robust in terms of their campaigning in the party system as anyone else.
Robust is one way of describing it. And I've heard this from the Lib Dems before. As I say, we are seeing a Lib Dem resurgence, but it doesn't ever translate into them forming the next government. And just on the Conservatives, let me say this. I have never seen the Conservative Party in such a state. The last time I remember them being in such a state was when they were getting rid of Mrs Thatcher. When you're in Parliament, every time you turn a corner, there are some Tory MPs in a huddle plotting. It seems to me there are not the votes in Parliament for any deal which Theresa May could conceivably bring forward. And the only way out of the current impasse is either, yes, a second referendum or a general election.
Your thoughts?
Well, I think Diane's being a bit charitable from the situation in the Labour Party, as we've already heard during the course of this programme. Look, the Liberal Democrats have come back from what was that historic low base. They did lose hundreds of these seats the last time these wards were contested, and it comes down to where I think you've seen Conservatives around the country as well underlining some of that local message of delivery, of actually keeping council tax down, getting things like refuse collection right, on fixing some of the street scene. Actually, there have been some, I think, really powerful local campaigns that have underlined where it's about delivery and how, yes, in places we've struggled to make that cut through in terms of what these elections actually about, local services, local people, local communities.
Okay, let's bring in John. John Curtis, Professor John Curtis. John, what do you make of it so far?
Well, I think Leila Moran has made a couple of very interesting interventions this morning. I think admission number one, if that's the right word, is that the Liberal Democrat performance isn't simply a question of the party winning over Remain voters. There's a bit of evidence that the party has done a little bit better in Remain areas, but it's not overwhelming. Rather, as she says, what is really, really striking is the Liberal Democrat recovery in places where the party had fallen back, but not fallen back so far that it was out of competition. So if I tell you, Huw, that in our key wards, in those wards where the Liberal Democrats were starting off at second place to the Liberal Democrats, on average, there is a very substantial double-digit swing from Liberal Democrats to the Conservatives, and this is one of the key reasons why the loss of Conservative seats is beginning to reach the levels it is, even though, as everybody keeps on saying, the Labour Party is putting in a disappointing performance. But of course, the second, I think, interesting... Labour Brown is essentially saying, yeah, we're getting back some of our local pavement politics. And I think there's a certain amount of truth for that. But the second interesting thing she said, I think, albeit in code, was to suggest to Change UK that it probably isn't a terribly good idea in the long run for them to be competing with the Democrats. She has already extolled the local arrangements they've had with the odd Greens and suggested that's helped to bring victory. And I think there was an unspoken statement there that, as she put it, so long as we have the first past the post system, it doesn't make much sense for us to fight each other. Now, of course, in the European Parliament elections on May the 23rd, Change UK and the Democrats are going to be fighting each other. Now, because it's a PR system, not so bad, but the truth is the Remain side could well end up with fewer MPs as a result of the split in the vote. So I think Liberal Democrats are saying, by the by, we really are now recovering some of our base, and therefore, as a result, it would not make sense for Change UK to deal with that. Second interesting intervention, I think, this morning came from Jess Phillips, a very impassioned intervention, really making clear her view that she thinks the Labour Party should have a clear view and it should be pro-second referendum. And one of the claims that she made was that the Labour Party was doing better in what she called posher areas. Bit of evidence for that, where the Labour vote is tending to fall away a couple of points more on average in Leave voting areas than it is in Remain voting areas, and therefore in working class areas rather than in middle class areas. But of course, I guess the conclusion she then drew that, because the party's doing badly in more working class Leave areas, therefore the party should come out in favour of a second referendum, is perhaps one that some of her parliamentary colleagues will not necessarily take on board. But I think certainly, the other internal argument, as it were, that's very clearly been exposed as a result of the results in the last few hours is that internal argument inside the Labour Party about what to do about Brexit. In a sense, there's one thing perhaps there's increasing agreement inside the party about is that maybe the days of the party's ambiguity are numbered, but reaching agreement as to which direction it should go in is proving rather more difficult.
John, many thanks again. We'll talk again later on as the coverage continues. We're just about up to the clock on this segment of our coverage. A sentence each from my panellists, because we're going to be saying farewell to them. Just one sentence, and I mean a sentence, Leila, just quickly on where you stand now.
The Liberal Democrats are back and we're here to stay.
Diane?
We are ready for the general election battle.
And James?
Conservatives determined to deliver on Brexit and make it happen.
That was commendably concise. You can all come back. Thank you very much. And Vicky, just a final thought from you.
I think Brexit is the key to this, and the two main parties are going to have to find a way through it, and there's not much sign at the moment that they can. And I think the ambiguity that there is on both sides is a problem, and unless they can solve that, according to their councillors around the country who have been defeated, they think that impasse in Westminster is having a devastating effect on the doorsteps.
Vicky, thanks very much, and we'll talk again a little later on. Plenty of results to come, OK? So we've just had 129 councils declared, 119 to come. Plenty to talk about. We'll be back at 2 o'clock on the BBC News channel. In the meantime, thanks for watching, and bye for now.